Chapter 788. The snowflakes were still drifting down in a seemingly irregular pattern. The room was as quiet as ever. Jingjiu backed out of the room, but he didn't go far. He waited calmly. A moment later, the person shrouded in fog also left the room and followed Jingjiu to a distant place. The hidden network in the simulated scene was like a patch of empty space. It could be constructed according to the user's will, and a house could be built in an instant. If one liked it, he could even build a palace here. However, this palace would be built on the sand of data, and it would collapse at the slightest gust of wind. Jingjiu pushed open a door in the empty space, motioning for the other party to follow him in. The person shrouded in fog was obviously not satisfied with the square house he built. She shook her head and built a Ferris wheel nearby. She was a woman. Jingjiu came to this conclusion not only because she liked the Ferris wheel, but also because many men liked the Ferris wheel in the novels and movies he had skimmed through. The problem was that this person, liked by Junren, liked to cover her face in a patch of fog. Apart from herself, only a woman would do this. As soon as Jingjiu and the person walked in, the Ferris wheel started rotating. The speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow, indicating that the algorithm was updated automatically. It was believed that nobody could eavesdrop on their conversation at the moment. It was evident that the person intended to show off her technical prowess to Jingjiu, but it was evident that Jingjiu didn't care about it. The person you want to investigate is Chun Xian, an interstellar soldier in the 4th Military Region of the Federation. He died in the fight against the Sea of Dark Matter 11 years ago. The person in fog continued. Since you want to investigate him, it means that he is still alive. Am I right? He is dead now, replied Jingjiu. The person in fog guessed what Jingjiu meant. After a moment of silence, she asked, "What do you want to investigate then?" "He is an assassin," said Jingjiu. "I want to know who bought him or which organization he belongs to." The modern people usually called him assassin, but the person was not used to being called an assassin. After a long moment of silence, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard of the butterfly?" Of course, Jingjiu knew that she was not asking about the Lepidoptera. The Misty Man said about 200 years ago, there was a special department in the Allied Army. It had no number or code, and it didn't exist in the files. You don't have to ask me how I know about this department. All I need to tell you is that it did exist, but it was quickly disbanded by the military. Jingjiu said, "Continue." The Misty Man said, even though the special unit did not have a code name, in the first 3 missions, they found traces of the butterfly. Jingjiu was not used to waiting for the other party to continue the conversation halfway, but he had no choice but to ask, In the first scene, there are 2 arcs, which can be seen as a simple drawing of butterfly wings. In the second scene, there were 3 dead yellow butterflies, and in the third scene, there were 2 eyes. The person in the fog noticed that Jingjiu had no intention of talking to her, so she continued, "You know, eyes are a common part of a butterfly's wings." "What were the contents of the 3 missions?" asked Jingjiu. The Misty Man said straightforwardly, "There are only post-investigation records in the top secret files of the military, but there are no detailed records. But according to my research, they were all dreadful incidents. The second mission even led to the destruction of a planet." "What does it have to do with the person I'm looking for?" asked Jingjiu. "Few people are qualified to know about this special department. I read some records by chance when I was a child, which said that the department had been disbanded, but I don't think so." The Misty Man seemed to have thought of something, as she said in a low voice, "I think that the butterfly has been flying in the sea of stars all the time." "Evidence?" asked Jingjiu. "I've studied all the major incidents in the Federation of the Milky Way in the last 200 years. 11% of the incidents were hard to explain, and I found traces of the butterfly in all the incidents. I believe that the organization has always existed, but I'm not sure if it's good or bad." The Misty Man continued, "For instance, during the election of the Federation 30 years ago, the most popular counselor was assassinated soundlessly on the heavily guarded main planet. In the war with the Sea of Dark Matter 70 years ago, the Stargate base fell. As billions of populace were on the verge of dying, the permanent star in the galaxy suddenly erupted a large electric storm, which destroyed the connection between the monsters of the sea of dark matter and the people living on the Stargate base. What did the butterfly intend to do? Asked Jingjio. The misty man said while staring into his eyes, "The image of the electric storm is a pair of wings of the butterfly." "You think too much," said Jingjio. This was an accurate judgment made by an astrophysicist. The misty man said, "If Chan Xin were an assassin, he would be working for that butterfly." Jingjio said, "A dead man coming back to life and becoming an assassin is more likely to be the will of the Federation according to the movies and novels." "Believe me, it's not the Federation," said the misty man. Jingjio pressed, "So you suspect that he has something to do with that butterfly?" The misty man said, "Otherwise, who could deceive the Federation and let a soldier of the military escape by faking his death?" Jingjio could sense that the Federation of the Milky Way had a tight control over all social strata, no matter if it was in the underground neighborhood, the New Era Institute, or Shoer City. The ubiquitous scanning had almost blocked all the criminal organizations in the galaxy. The scenes in the movies were merely in the imagination. As such, this conjecture seemed reasonable. However, the assassin in overalls didn't have any trace of the butterfly on his body. Thinking of his low cultivation state, Jingjio wondered if he was a low-level member of this organization. No matter whether the misty man's conjecture was correct or not, she had provided accurate information about the man in overalls and a possible reference. Jingjio said, "The deal is done. What do you want?" The misty man said while staring at his face, "I want to know who you are." Jingjio had promised to do one thing when he asked the most formidable cloud ghosts in the Federation of the Milky Way for help in that room a few days ago, though it was up to him to decide whether he could do it or not. Who would have thought that the person in the fog would use this condition on him? The Ferris wheel had rotated a dozen times, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. The two of them had talked face to face for a long time. Yet they didn't know what the other person looked like, and their voices were of course fake. That person's technique was indeed brilliant, even a bit flashy. The Ferris wheel let out a faint sound of friction, making the room even quieter. The atmosphere grew a bit depressing. The person thought that Jingjio would refuse his request. As he was about to mock Jingjio, he heard an unexpected answer. "I'm Jingjio." Jingjio doesn't interfere with the well of the river. 9 out of 10 things will happen. That person had done a good job in the after-sales service. He drew an image in the air with his finger, saying, "I look like this." The atmosphere in the Ferris wheel suddenly grew cold. If there was such an atmosphere in this world simulated by data, looking at the image, the misty man asked after a moment of silence, "Why do you have such a weird name as Jingjio?" "The name Wild Rabbit is also weird," said Jingjio. The atmosphere grew even colder. It was true that Jingjio had figured out that the misty man was the Wild Rabbit, whom he had chased to the battleship. It was truly unexpected that the person who had a grudge against him was helping him investigate. The Wild Rabbit said with a sneer, "The meaning of my name is that even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered." The universe was even darker outside the galaxy. It seemed that the tens of thousands of permanent stars in the distance could never be approached. Looking back from the battleship, one could see the shape of the entire galaxy, which looked like a toy in a child's hand. Standing outside the locked captain's room, the captain had a terrible look on his face and messy hair. He waved his hand to drive away his subordinates and yelled through the intercom helplessly, "The battleship has been offline for more than 10 minutes. What on earth do you want to do?" Nobody answered his question. He could only vaguely hear someone yelling something like "liar" inside. As the door of the captain's room slid open, the voice grew clearer. "Liar. All men are liars." With a changed expression, the captain dashed into the captain's room as quickly as he could and locked the door from the inside. He came to a corner and asked, "Han Dong, what has happened?" A young woman in a military uniform sat in front of a red metal box while holding a computer. Her face was red, indicating that she was angry. Her name was Ran Handong, the computer maintenance officer of this battleship in the front line. Of course, she had a better technical ability and family background than a regular computer maintenance officer. As for her family background, only 3 people on the fleet knew about it. Damn it. Ran Handong didn't heed the captain. Looking at the perfect face on the computer, she said with a sneer, "I helped you out of goodwill, but you deceived me with a game map." The captain leaned over, looked at the face, and said with slight surprise, "Which company made this game? The Thunder? Who was the original artist? It's truly an art." Hearing this, Ran Handong was taken aback. She typed quickly on the computer, searching for the name Jing Jiao. He is indeed a liar. The face is fake, and even the name is fake. How shameless is he? Looking at the search results on the light screen, she had almost cursed it out loud. The search results were all about a book called The Path Toward Heaven. The more the captain listened, the more puzzled he felt, and a bit uneasy, wondering if the young mistress was dating someone online. And was she deceived? "I'd like to apply for a vacation." Ran Handong said this while staring into his eyes. The captain thought that he wouldn't dare refuse her if she asked for a vacation, but she had to give him a reason. She couldn't possibly use the excuse of treating a love wound. If this was known to the main planet, would he still be alive? "I'd like to go back to the Stargate base." Ran Handong turned around and looked at the stars in the dark space. "I have a distant aunt who is not in good health. I'd like to visit her on behalf of my mother." The captain knew her family background, so he knew who this distant aunt was, his expression changing slightly. Chapter 789. The dinner party of the Twirling Rain Company was held in the restaurant on the top floor of the hotel at the University of Stargate. It was because this place was the favorite dining spot for the residents of Shoer City, and more importantly, it was because Zone Lizzie lived in this hotel. All she needed to do was walk out of her room and take the elevator to the 3rd floor. What Gao Shu didn't expect was that the mistress from the underground world still refused his invitation. He walked to the front of the stage and announced the news to the colleagues of the company and the technical staff of the studio regretfully. The Twirling Rain Company had paid close attention to the project The Path Toward Heaven due to the mobilization of their resources. As for the technical staff of the studio, they were extremely curious about the original author who had saved them from the crisis. They couldn't help but feel disappointed when they heard Gao Shu's announcement, but there was nothing they could do about it. Gao Shu waved his hand to decline the champagne offered to him by the director of the studio. He walked into the lounge by the side of the Grand Hall and bowed to the CEO, sitting in the soft chair with a high back, saying she doesn't want to come. The CEO of the Twirling Rain Company waved his hand to indicate that it had nothing to do with him and that there was no need to be nervous. "It looks like we won't be able to meet her by chance today," he said. He suddenly changed the topic and asked, "Who is the youth in the tracksuit?" "I haven't found him yet," said Gao Shu guiltily. The CEO said after some thought, "Don't check too hard." "Yes, sir." Speed up the construction of the world according to her request. Enlarge the passages painted by the characters, and give them more autonomy. Gao Shu went on uncertainly. Without a unified image, it will be more difficult to promote the project. The CEO stood up and said, "Please ask that young mistress to make the initial design by herself." Gao Shu understood what the CEO meant, nodding with a faint smile. The CEO walked toward the outside of the lounge. He suddenly stopped short and asked, "Take good care of that young mistress. At least don't let her suffer in terms of food, clothing, housing, and transportation." Gao Shu bowed deeply and said, "Don't worry, sir." The Twirling Rain Company took good care of Zone Lizzie. Their care was mainly reflected in the word care. They didn't let her find out anything, and at the same time, they made her feel happy. Though the room they booked for her was a suite, it was not the most expensive one. It had only one bedroom, but the view was the best. The balcony was outside the building and was perfectly isolated from the view of the surroundings. In front of him was a clear night sky and a large lake in the distance. The sense of privacy was excellent. Jingjiu didn't have to worry about being seen by others if he took off his clothes and basked in the stars. Ahem. Zone Lizzie pulled back her gaze uneasily and pretended to cough twice, saying, "The air up there is much better than down there, and I can bask in the sun. I haven't coughed much lately." She suddenly remembered that she had been hiding something from him. After a moment of silence, she said, "Actually, I'm sick." Jingjiu said, "I have medicine." Zhong Lizi chuckled and said earnestly, "I'm serious. My illness is quite troublesome. If the gene modification is unsuccessful," Jingjiu said, "it will be cured." His tone was indifferent and casual, like a superior trying to comfort his subordinates without any sincerity. Yet, Zhong Lizi was fully aware that Jingjiu wasn't good at comforting others. Whatever he said was the truth, which was the best concern and wish for him. "Have you found the person you're looking for?" She was also very concerned about him. Thinking of his speculation, Jingjiu was certain that the culprit who had used the assassins to test him was an ascendant from Chaotian. He uttered, Zhong Lizi felt surprised, but also happy for him. "Then, should we continue to play the game?" she asked. "Of course," replied Jingjiu. "The book, The Path Toward Heaven, and the movie based on it should be spread throughout the Federation of the Milky Way so that the Snow Girl could read it. To deal with the fairy energy and the super weapons on the battleship, the Snow Girl was the most suitable candidate. If she were here, he wouldn't need to hide on this planet. He would have gone to the core of the planet to search for the clues of the distant ancient civilization. But where was she? She had come to this world not long before him. Given her temperament, she should have killed many enemies on a colonized planet and left many traces in the news. Zhong Lizi didn't know what was on Jingjiu's mind. "Then, I'm going to bed," she said while rubbing her slightly damp silvery hair. Jingjiu didn't say anything. He kept staring at the starry sky in a daze. Zhong Lizi walked into the bedroom. A moment later, a rustling sound could be heard, and then it became quiet. A moment later, the sound of her turning over could be heard in the bedroom again. Listening to her breathing and heartbeat, Jingjiu was aware that she was thinking about all sorts of things and tossing and turning in bed, unable to fall asleep. He waved his hand to wake her up. The night wind blew over on the deck. Zhong Lizi's vision grew blurry as she looked at the outside of the window. The starlight grew more watery as she fell asleep. The stars in the sky hung on the black screen in silence. It was not a good thing for Jingjiu to have too many stars at the moment. The galaxy where the Federation of the Milky Way was located had more than 100 million permanent stars, and the Federation had explored 7 million of them. Of course, most of them had been observed from a distance, and no exploration team had been sent there. There were so many galaxies out there. Among so many stars, which one was the one he wanted to find? After killing the destructive heavenly demon of the outside world, Jingjiu fell unconscious for a while. When he woke up, he found himself in the laboratory of the Stargate base. Where was the sun in Chaotian then? There were countless stars in the vast universe. Without any clues in a star chart, it was hard to find a specific star. As he conversed with the wild rabbit in the hidden network that day, he snuck into the battleship where the rabbit was and found some top-secret military information. Tens of thousands of burning battleships traveling in the universe must have been a major military operation, which must have left some traces behind. As expected, Jingjiu had successfully found the date of the operation and the galaxy where it was located. He calculated the distance based on the flying speed and time after he left the bamboo chair, and was certain that the blue permanent star was very close to the one he was looking for. It was easy to find the blue permanent star. The serial number of the blue permanent star was Mach 31. It was on that side. There was indeed a star not far from the Mach 31, but it was a bit dim and inconspicuous. Looking at the star, Jingjiu brought up the star chart in his mind and adjusted the angle of the star. In the end, he found a permanent star in the star chart. The permanent star grew larger in his awareness, and in the end, it could be seen clearly by the naked eye. It was a white fireball. It was exactly the same as the one he saw on the bamboo chair in terms of its size and color. Looking at the distant star in the night sky, Jingjiu was lost in thought. It turned out to be his hometown. Yet, it was a long way to go back. The location of the star was in the remotest part of this galaxy. If he went further, he would be in the endless void, which was difficult to pass through even the warped black holes. The endless void was called the dark realm of the universe, and the sea of dark matter was located there. Looking at the star in silence, Jingjiu knocked lightly on the armrest of the chair with his fingers. Back when he was lying on the bamboo chair by the pond in the small village, he often knocked on the armrest of the chair in a seemingly unconscious but actually regular manner. Whenever he did this, he would be thinking about something important. If the ascendants left Chaotian and calmed down after the initial shock, they would have to choose their next path. They might choose different directions, but they would definitely head for a certain star. The human beings were no different from the moths in their yearning for the light, and so were the ascendants. There were altogether 27 ascendants recorded in Chaotian, all of whom had a high cultivation state and a high magic prowess. For instance, the founding grandmasters of the Aoyama sect, the former church master of the Bloody Demon Church, the free-traveling practitioner on Penglai Island, the immortal Chunyang, and Jingjiu. These ascendants either had a clear Tao heart or a sea of devil flames. They wouldn't panic no matter what they encountered, and they wouldn't have any psychological problems. Though they might encounter those heavenly demons of the outside world and be killed, many of them would still arrive at the nearest permanent star and get in touch with the human civilization in this world. Where are these people then? Who was the ascendant who tried to sound him out and then warned him? Jingjiu turned his head to look at the other side of the night sky, which was even brighter. The center of the galaxy was over there. There were countless stars there. It was said that the night on the main star was no different from the day. The light pollution and radiation were so strong that the people could only live under the protective shield. It was rumored that the distant ancient civilization originated from there, but Jingjiu didn't think so. In comparison to the core of the planet, the sun in his hometown was more suitable for the birth and growth of a weak civilization. It was because the sun was very dim and inconspicuous, and its position was very remote. It was better to live in the countryside than in the cities. In the next moment, Jingjiu began to ponder a deeper issue. He reached out his finger and wrote a few words on the bright starry sky. Year, month, standard day, robot, heavenly dog, eats the moon. Solar eclipse. The sun was the general name of the permanent star in the galaxy where the habitable planets were located by the human civilization. The moon was the general name of the satellite of the habitable planets. During the daytime, the sunlight of the sun was too bright. Even though the moon was between the planet and the sun, the human beings couldn't see it with their naked eyes unless their cultivation state was very high. Only when the moon moved right between the planet and the sun and blocked the sunlight of the sun could the moon be seen, though it was only in the form of a shadow. In the beginning, the students of the University of Stargate didn't pay much attention to Zonglizi, even though she had a beautiful appearance and silvery hair. It was because she was a person from the underworld and had to go back if she didn't have enough credit points. The students of the University of Stargate, who were known for their talent and calmness, might feel a bit of pity for her, but they didn't pay too much attention to her. The situation had suddenly changed in the last few days. It was because the girl with black hair, Jiang Yuxia, often came to see Zonglizi. When the students wanted to see the girl with black hair, their line of sight would be blocked by Zonglizi. Why did the candidate for the female priest of the Institute of Divinity care so much about her? The students couldn't help but pay more attention to Zonglizi after feeling surprised. It was like the eclipse of the sun, when people remembered to look at the moon in broad daylight. The conversation between the two girls at the school gate and some other news had spread to the campus. By then, the students learned that Zonglizi had written a novel that was well received by the students. More surprisingly, the book was chosen by the Twirling Rain Company and was to be adapted into a game. Some people even said that the Twirling Rain Company had a very high expectation of this game. If all this was true, this girl from the underworld should be able to earn a large number of credit points for the immigration. With such a prospect in mind, Zonglizi's silvery hair and beautiful appearance had finally shown their true colors in the eyes of the students. She had received 7 love letters in the last 2 days. Though the moon was easily visible during the eclipse of the sun, people still went to praise the sun after it appeared. Jiang Yuxiao walked into the classroom, wearing the traditional white priest dress. Her black and smooth hair reached her waist, and her neat fringe supported her straight but not rigid eyebrows. She exuded a sacred and peaceful aura as she walked. The scene attracted everyone's attention. It wasn't until Jiang Yuxiao walked to the back of the classroom and sat by Zhong Lizi that the gazes were drawn back reluctantly. Jiang Yuxiao had often come to see Zhong Lizi over the last 2 days to talk about the content of the story. She couldn't help but ask Zhong Lizi when she would continue writing the second half of the story. Zhong Lizi thought that Jiang Yuxiao didn't intend to continue the story, judging from her expression. She didn't know how to answer Jiang Yuxiao, so she evaded the question vaguely. Jiang Yuxiao noticed that Zhong Lizi was absent-minded and misunderstood something. She followed Zhong Lizi's line of sight and saw the ginkgo trees outside the window and the large lawn on the other side of the ginkgo trees. In the end, Jiang Yuxiao saw a strange guy covered in clothes lying on the lawn and basking in the sun. The leaves of the ginkgo trees were still golden. The wind on the campus wasn't strong, so they hadn't fallen off much over the last few days. The black leather shoes stepped on the leaves, giving off a crisp and alluring sound, as if they had a nice scent. Her black hair was tousling in the breeze, and she was holding a rare paper book in her bosom, which seemed to exude a faint scent. Many gazes followed Jiang Yuxiao to the side of the ginkgo trees. Nobody dared get close to her after she had passed half of the campus, nor did anyone speak to her. Her beauty was accompanied by a sacred glow in addition to the scent, keeping others at a distance of 1,000 miles. Hello, I'm Jiang Yuxiao, an exchange student at the Institute of Divinity. She walked to the middle of the lawn and stood by the side of a youth in a blue tracksuit, saying softly, I met you at the school gate the other day. Are you Zhong Lizi's friend? Jing Jiao pulled the collar of his coat to the highest point to cover his face and head with the hat, looking like a silkworm chrysalis, looking a bit adorable. He knew who this girl with black hair was, but he thought she was like that girl at the New Era Institute. What was her name? So he didn't pay any attention to her. It was evident that Jiang Yuxiao was not that kind of girl. Of course, she might have hidden her true feelings better, so she didn't feel angry even though she was treated so coldly. She let out a faint smile and sat down by Jing Jiao, following his line of sight to look at the sky. The clouds were drifting in the blue sky, the edges of which were gilded by the permanent stars that were descending toward the other side of the Rift Valley. These were the sceneries she was used to. What was worth looking at for so long? Chapter 790. What are you looking at? She asked curiously. Jingjiu noticed that her voice was clean and clear. This kind of cleanness was not the result of training. It was the original naivety. If the stupid side of naivety was removed, the remaining side would be curiosity. This meant that her curiosity was genuine. As such, he had a rare desire to answer the question. Yet, he had no way to answer the question. There were other things in the blue sky besides the clouds whose edges were scorched by the radiance of the stars. For instance, a few battleships were hidden behind the clouds. He had been basking in the sun on the lawn for a few days while looking at those battleships. By tampering with the wild rabbit, he had accessed the military network and found the battleship units stationed on the Stargate base. It took him half a day to write some programs and input them into the central computer. All he had to do now was wait. If the Ascendant intended to warn him or kill him directly, why don't you use the battleships to bombard me? Come on then. Looking at those battleships with narrowed eyes, Jing Jiao thought that he would attack them and find them as soon as they started the program, regardless of whether they used the superpowered weapons of the fairy energy or the laser guns. Could he tell this to this girl with black hair, Jiang Yuxiao? Of course not. As such, he ignored her. Jiang Yuxiao was still not angry, though she felt a bit frustrated. She fanned her face with her small hand out of boredom, as if she felt a bit hot. The season when the ginkgo trees turned into yellow flames couldn't be too hot, not to mention that the surface of this planet had always been a bit cold. A faint and fresh energy spread out along with the breeze from her palm and landed on the grass and leaves, condensing into tiny water beads. This was probably the secret life magic of the Institute of Divinity or the Priest Clan. If it were a regular person, they would feel refreshed and comfortable when they sensed such a refreshing energy. But in Jing Jiao's eyes, it was merely the elementary energy of the water system, and he didn't like it very much because of the immortal Bai. "You sit further away from me," he said. Jiang Yuxia had never encountered such a situation. She blushed and felt extremely embarrassed. She got up helplessly and sat under a ginkgo tree in the back. A gentle breeze blew past, and a few golden leaves fell on her shoulders. They looked like the most intricately designed and beautiful golden ornaments. Jing Jiu saw the scene with his spiritual awareness, thinking of the begonia tree in the Jing house in Jiaobi City and Baizhou. He made a decision without hesitation. No matter how much he disliked the water element aura, he would never speak to that black-haired girl again. Sitting under the ginkgo tree, Jiang Yuxia tilted her head and looked at him while hugging her knees. The more she thought about it, the more curious she felt. Who was this youth in blue sportswear? Was he her boyfriend? Li Zi came from the underworld and had only been here for a few days. With her cold temperament, how could she have gotten to know a boyfriend so quickly? Could it be that they knew each other before? Or could it be that this young man escaped from below, so he didn't go anywhere else and only dared to bask in the sun on this unscanned lawn? The game in this world was only responsible for the structure of the world, and many small plots had to be set up by the players themselves. This kind of culture brought about a far-reaching change. It was because the girls like Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia liked to make up stories, and they were often immersed in the stories they had made up. As the breeze blew gently, another golden leaf fell down. This time it landed in her hand. She pinched the stem of the leaf with her fingers and looked at the leaf that looked like a small fan, lost in thought. The leaves of the ginkgo tree were indeed beautiful, but the eyes of that youth were even more beautiful. She saw a pair of eyes when they were talking to each other. They were very close, so she could see them clearly. The pair of eyes were as beautiful as crystals. No, as gems. No, as colored glaze. None of them were right. His eyes were brighter than the stars and clearer than the lake water. Jiang Yuxia suddenly came back to her senses and shook her head imperceptibly, wondering what she was thinking about when she was the one who would become a female priest. Jing Jiu was aware that the black-haired girl had been staring at him, but he didn't pay much attention to it. There was a similar story about being killed while watching in both Chao Tian and in the ancient books of this world. Jing Jiu didn't quite understand it, but he attributed it to the fact that those young masters were too weak. If he felt uncomfortable being stared at, how had he survived all these years? The others on the lawn couldn't see his face, except that he covered his head and face as much as possible, looking like a pervert. It was inevitable that they would cast him peculiar glances. Yet, many beings didn't care about him at all, like those children and dogs who were playing and laughing happily. The Human Federation of the Milky Way was a new flower growing out of the ashes of the distant ancient civilization. It was in the period of its adolescence. The colonized planets provided it with endless resources, and the threat of the sea of dark matter was temporarily locked by the star chain. Coupled with the welfare policy of the Federation, the populace was more than willing to have children. The number of children he had seen in Shou City was more than what he had seen in the past 1,000 years. In comparison to Chao Tian, the populace in this world lived a much richer and happier life. Even the dark and gloomy streets in the underground were many times better than the slums in Shangzhou City. Thinking of this, Jing Jiu made a small adjustment in his evaluation of the two civilizations. The twilight grew darker, and the distant permanent star was about to set below the mountains on the other side of the Great Rift Valley. The school would be over soon. The dim light emitted by the ring led his awareness to the interplanetary network. He passed by countless false digital markers, passed through a dozen information-skipping bridges, and sank into the deepest part of the ocean of the network, arriving in that room. The snowflakes were drifting slowly in the room. Though there was no information about the assassin in overalls, there were a few messages left by the wild rabbit. The female maintenance officer of the computer on the battleship accused Jing Jiu angrily of breaking his promise and being shameless, saying that he didn't deserve to be a cloud ghost. Jing Jiu had learned that the other party's name was Ran Han Dong, a girl, but he didn't know why she scolded him for being shameless and saying that he didn't keep his promise. Guessing the thoughts and emotions of others was more difficult than cultivating the inherited Heaven Sword style and the theory of numbers. Jingjio didn't think about it and left the room. The refreshing electronic music rang out on the campus, sounding like hundreds of streams of water of different sizes flowing on the ice cubes of different thickness. It was quite pleasant to hear. It didn't take long before Zhong Lizi came to the edge of the lawn. Seeing Jiang Yuxia sitting under the ginkgo tree, she couldn't help but feel startled. Jiang Yuxia waved her hand at her and raised the paper book in her hand, indicating that she would sit there for a while longer. The self-illumination of the buildings on the campus was quite advanced, but it was still a bit dark under the ginkgo tree. How could she read the words clearly? Zhong Lizi didn't have time to think about it, because Jingjio had walked to the edge of the lawn. The two of them walked toward the outside of the campus like they had done a few days ago. Jiang Yuxia put away the book in her hand and looked at the young man and woman in the shadow of the ginkgo tree. Nobody could see the loneliness and yearning in the deep end of her eyes. After walking out of the forest of ginkgo trees, the lights were even brighter. The glows of the floating skateboards could be seen in the sky now and then, reminding Jingjio of the sword lights in Chaotian. Zhong Lizi suddenly sighed. Jingjio was aware that she was ready to talk to him. He uttered through his nose as a prelude to the conversation. I feel a great deal of pressure right now. I'm not talking about the gaming company. They don't bother me much these days anyway. I'm talking about the studies. Zhong Lizi held the folder containing the computer even tighter as she continued. The students grew up on the upper levels. They had undergone the gene modification when they were young and the knowledge input when they were in the middle school. The knowledge input was the act of instilling some basic knowledge into the deep consciousness of humans through the interactive system of the human brain, and then awakening them through the targeted teaching in the future. The basic knowledge that was instilled into the consciousness by force was mostly memorizable knowledge, which had nothing to do with other abilities, such as logic, calculation, and analysis. Jingjio was indeed startled when he learned of this method. As he was about to increase his evaluation of this civilization, he found that this method was problematic. There were many papers in the Science Academy stating that the knowledge input could affect the students' learning abilities in other aspects. The human brain couldn't withstand too much information input in a short time. Not everybody could store a large amount of data in their consciousness like Jingjio could. The reason the brains of the students who had received the knowledge input didn't explode was that they had to undergo the most rigorous evaluation in terms of the capacity of the brain, the number of cells in the gray matter cortex, and the extent of the development of the brain. They couldn't choose a subject for the knowledge input until they had passed the evaluation. The number of subjects was strictly limited. By now, the success rate of the knowledge input was very high, and there was basically no risk involved. No matter what, the students who were qualified for the knowledge input must have a good foundation and were the elites trained by the Federation, like these proud students at the University of Stargate. The New Era Institute where Zhong Lizi had studied was quite ordinary. She hadn't received the knowledge input, so it was hard for her to catch up with these students in terms of their studies. Jingjio didn't care about this matter, saying, "Change the subject." Zhong Lizi was well aware of Jingjio's temperament. She was quite happy that he had uttered twice and asked to change the subject. "I've received 7 love letters," she said cheerfully. When she said this, her expression was very natural, and she smiled very happily, like a girl sharing an interesting story with her best friend. In fact, she had been watching Jingjio from the corner of her eyes. Jingjio was even less concerned about this matter, and said, "Change." Zhong Lizi pouted and said, "I know Jiang Yuxia isn't reading a book. She's going to see you." Jingjio didn't deny it, because it was the truth. He said, "Stay away from her," just like that. He had forgotten the name of the girl at the New Era Institute. Zhong Lizi found that she had forgotten about it. "Of course I remember that girl. Her name is Lu Shuiqian. Don't laugh at my memory every time. Jiang Yuxia is different from her." Zhong Lizi said softly, "I stayed in the hotel, but she, a favored girl, stayed in the dormitory. She didn't try to dissuade me, even though she knew about it. If it were the girl with the surname Liu at the New Era Institute, she would probably try to persuade her, 'You should live in the dormitory with the others because of this reason,' or something like that. These words might be sensible. They might even sound kind, but they were superfluous in the end. They had other purposes. Don't worry about me. I can tell who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. I've lived alone since I was very young and grew up in that neighborhood. My ability to judge people is better than you think. She arched her eyebrows while looking at Jingjio, saying in a cheeky manner, I agreed to share the room with you that night because I know you are a good guy. Jingjio reached out his finger and flicked a golden ginkgo leaf in front of him, saying, You're an idiot. Nobody was born to be a good guy or a bad guy. A good guy could do bad things, and a bad guy could do good things. It was foolish to judge what the other party would do in the future based on what they had done at the time. You can say whatever you want. I think everybody will encounter difficulties at some point. We should help them if we can. After a moment of silence, Zhong Lizi continued, The reason I'm willing to be friends with Lu Shuiqian is because I don't have many friends. I don't care if I pretend to be friends with her. The two of them came to the edge of the swimming pool under the hotel. The shadow of the big tree fell on the surface of the water, swaying gently. The shadow of the tree and the surface of the water seemed to be together, but in fact, they would never be together. It was such a lonely feeling. Zhong Lizi suddenly halted her steps and said to Jingjio, In fact, I'm really sick. I really have the medicine, said Jingjio. In the dead of night, the clouds and smoke were all gone, and the figures of the battleships could be seen more clearly. Lying on the chair on the deck, Jingjio was looking at the stars instead of the battleships. All of a sudden, he reached out his hand and grabbed at the night sky, as if he intended to grab the starlight in his hand. He was not absorbing the fairy energy to cultivate, nor was he thinking of the round turtle and Ada. He didn't even know why he had done such an inexplicable and unnecessary action. He didn't understand why he had done such an inexplicable and unnecessary action either. The particles, the strong force, the slowing down of the speed of light, the change of the rules, the same words came to his mind again. Was it because his physical strength had weakened after he came to this world that his heart had become soft-hearted? Thinking of all this, Jingjio got up and came to the room, bringing in a gust of gentle wind, making Zhong Lizi fall into a deep sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and moved his palm slowly half a foot above her body. A faint and extremely sharp sword essence shot out from his palm and swept across the young girl's body from head to toe. In addition to its formidable power, the sword was exceedingly cold, similar to the 1,000-mile ice formation in the sword jail. The sword was shapeless and immaterial, but it seemed to be able to twist the space, preventing the starlight coming in through the window from refracting it. The room grew a bit brighter. Crack! The water in the cup by the bedside table was frozen into ice cubes in an instant, and then the cup broke apart. After a long while, Jingjio left the bedroom and returned to the chair on the deck. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. Chapter 791. The next morning, a loud rooster's cry could be heard in the bedroom of the suite in the hotel. Zhong Lizi pulled off the thin quilt and sat up effortlessly while twisting her body like a doll. She rubbed her messy silvery hair and reflexively turned off the alarm clock. She reached out her hand to the cup in an attempt to drink some water, but there was nothing there. Confused, she opened her eyes and looked over, only to find that there was nothing on the bedside table. She looked at the bedside table on the other side. The big yellow cat was still looking at her in the photo with a bored expression. She didn't forget to bring the alarm clock and the photo upstairs. But where was the cup? Zhong Lizi got up and walked to the living room. She was taken aback when she found the water stains on the cup in the trash bin, wondering if she had the habit of sleepwalking. It was then that she found it was easier to get up that day than usual, and she didn't feel tired at all. Her body was full of a vigorous energy. Was it hope or Yuanqi? She stared at herself in the mirror as she brushed her teeth. She felt her arms were sore, and so were her entire body. She couldn't help but feel uneasy, wondering what had happened to her. She didn't have the time to wash her face. She put the electric toothbrush into the charging cup and ran to the deck. What did you do to me last night? She asked Jingjio. Jingjio opened his eyes and said while looking at her, There's some foam at the corners of your mouth. Zhong Lizi's mind was full of questions at the moment, so she had no time to think about it. She continued asking after wiping the foam off the corners of her mouth with the back of her hand. I said, "And the eye wax." Jingjiu closed his eyes and went back to sleep. It was obvious that he didn't want to talk to her. Zhong Lizi let out a soft cry and washed her face in the bathroom. She came back to the deck after making sure she was clean in the mirror. Seeing his tired face, she suddenly didn't have the heart to wake him up. After some hesitation, she went to the university with a folder containing the computer in her hand. A drizzle fell down after the stars disappeared last night. The raindrops passed through the protective shield in the atmosphere and landed on the ginkgo trees at the University of Stargate, bringing down more leaves. The ginkgo trees grew sparser, making it easier for the sunlight to pass through them. Zhong Lizi looked at the distance outside the window while holding her chin in her hands. It was unclear what she saw, but she let out a faint smile. The grass was slightly damp, but Jingjiu didn't care. He pulled his collar up to the highest point, laid down in his usual position, and looked at the sky. The light rain fell from the sky and landed on his face, but it did not really touch his skin, only bringing a slightly cool feeling. Looking at the falling rain, he naturally thought of Aoyama, the first spring rain every year, and the scene of the rain passing through the Aoyama Formation. Perhaps it was this similar feeling that made his mind extremely relaxed. His exhaustion also became more real, and he actually closed his eyes and began to really sleep. The delicate black leather shoes stepped on the drenched ginkgo leaves, giving off an unpleasant sound. Jiang Yuxiao walked past the edge of the lawn while holding an old-fashioned cotton umbrella. Seeing the youth sleeping soundly in the drizzle, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes full of curiosity and bewilderment. What kind of person was this? How could he not care about how others looked at him and live like a crazy poet? The passers-by on the grass were all startled to see this scene, pointing at Jingjiu and discussing something in a low voice. Jiang Yuxia turned around and left after looking at him in the rain for a while. Looking at the lawn in the distance, Zhong Lizi couldn't pay attention to the discussion in the classroom. Her emotions grew more and more chaotic. In the end, she stood up and walked toward the outside of the classroom. When she was at the New Era Institute, she had imagined being an exchange student many times. At the time, she thought that if she had the opportunity to study at the University of Stargate, she would spend all her time and energy on studying and cultivation and would never skip classes. She realized now that it was necessary to skip classes sometimes. Pa, 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 pa. The sneakers with the imitation of the military made a crisp sound when they stepped on the drenched ginkgo leaves, sounding like a heavy fist hitting the surface of the water. Zhong Lizi ran to the lawn from the teaching building and came to the side of Jingjiu. She opened the air umbrella and shielded Jingjiu from the rain. "Are you all right?" If others heard what she said, they would think that she was mocking Jingjiu for being retarded and lying on the lawn in the rain. She wondered if he was bathing in the sun or doing the laundry. No, it wasn't. What she did was notice that Jingjiu was a bit tired, so she was worried about him. More importantly, she was worried that something might happen to his body if he was drenched in the rain. Jingjiu opened his eyes and saw the raindrops on his silvery hair and the misty raindrops blown away by the air currents, as well as the concerned face in the rain. He was in the 3000 nunnery last time when he woke up, and he was in another world this time. Fortunately, he had comfortable people and sceneries in both worlds. "I'm all right." Seeing the expression on Zhong Lizi's face, Jingjiu knew that she wouldn't believe him. "I'm a bit tired. I'll be fine after a few days of rest," he said. It was true that Jingjiu had recovered after a few days of rest. But what kind of event would require him to rest for so long and even sleep for a few days? The rain hadn't ceased over the last few days. He often slept on the lawn of the campus, attracting many people's attention. Zhong Lizi was well aware of Jingjiu's temperament, so she didn't pay any attention to him. She put an air current umbrella by his side, but she didn't see him use it. Jiang Yuxiao would glance at him when she walked by the lawn, but she didn't do anything else. Nobody knew that Jingjiu was waiting for the battleship behind the dark clouds to attack him on the lawn. Seeing him lying on the lawn in the rain all day long, the people thought he was a freakish weirdo. A freakish weirdo could easily become a celebrity. It didn't take long for the whole of the University of Stargate to know of his existence. Many people would come to the lawn on the other side of the ginkgo tree to see him during the break between classes. Along with the crisp and gentle electronic music, the buildings on the campus started glowing, competing with the stars that had just appeared in the night sky. Zhong Lizi ran to the other side of the lawn against the drizzle while covering her head with a folder. Jing Jiu got up and came to the road and handed the air current umbrella to her. He hadn't used the umbrella in the last few days, but she insisted on leaving it by his side every day. She would only take it back in the evening. Zhong Lizi pressed the button lightly, and the air current came out from the top of the umbrella, brushing away the raindrops. Her posture looked like she was holding a sword high in the air. If the protective shield of this planet was similar to the Great Formation of Aoyama, this umbrella was similar to a small, forbidding formation. Sensing the gentle wind blowing on his face, Jing Jiu suddenly asked, "Do you want to learn some more useful magic methods in cultivation?" The physical rules in Chaotian were different from those in this world, and the human constitutions were quite different as well. The people here couldn't even learn the most common magic methods, like the fist method learned by the external disciples at the South Pine Pavilion. If Zhong Lizi wanted to learn them, she would have to modify the magic methods in Chaotian in an all-round way, or even change the basic way of thinking. This was a very difficult task. Nobody dared try it, save for those cultivation practitioners and great scholars who had established their own sections. Yet, Jing Jiu was the most outstanding cultivation practitioner and scholar in Chaotian. Zhong Lizi was unaware of the significance of this statement. She thought that Jing Jiu intended to teach her the secret magic methods of the rumored clans. She shook her head after a long moment of silence. Jing Jiu felt surprised. Zhong Lizi lowered her head and looked at her, and Jing Jiu's feet moving back and forth on the surface of the ground covered with a thin layer of water, saying nothing. Seeing that she was unwilling to tell him, Jing Jiu didn't press her any further. They came to the edge of the swimming pool under the hotel. The injury of the big tree on which a piece of wood was taken had been healed by the rainwater. The color of the wood at the edge of the hole had turned darker, as if it had merged with the bark of the tree. She halted her steps. The air came out from the top of the umbrella handle, blowing the rainwater into the air and then falling down slowly like a fountain. "We'll go to the ground to visit our university in a few days," said Zhong Lizi earnestly as she lifted her head and stared into Jing Jiu's eyes. Most of the faculties of the University of Stargate were in Shoer City, but the main university was still on the ground in name. A few faculties related to military affairs were still there. As they exchanged students from various places, they had to visit the university. Jing Jiu didn't understand why she told him this. "You need to go through a physical examination before you go to the ground." After a moment of silence, she continued, "I have something to hide from you. In fact, I'm sick. The university won't expel me because of this, but I can't learn what you want to teach me right now." Jing Jiu said, "I also have something to hide from you, but it's not important. As I told you, your illness will be fine." Zhong Lizi tucked her hair behind her ears and let out a relieved smile, saying, "Thanks to you, I might be able to undergo the gene modification. Though the doctor said the probability was only 31%, I might actually be fine." Jing Jiu said, "If I say you'll be fine, then you'll be fine. No matter how advanced the civilization was, or even how brilliant the distant ancient civilization was, the hospital wouldn't change much, no matter how many spider plants were placed in it. In a sense, this was the best place to experience the feeling of life. But the intelligent beings like humans were extremely afraid of this kind of experience, so they tried their best to stay away from it. As such, the smell of life in the hospital was very faint, and one could only see the cold metal apparatuses and the automatic medical cabins. "I'm a patient with the 4th type Y blood." Zhong Lizi's voice didn't tremble, but her face was a bit pale. The doctor glanced at her in surprise. He controlled his emotion and didn't reveal any sympathy or pity, saying, "Let me take a look at the medical record." Along with a faint beep, the bracelet was connected to the medical terminal, displaying her citizen medical record. Seeing the important notes written in the most conspicuous font, the doctor sighed inwardly and said, "Lie down in it." Zhong Lizi put on the light blue medical uniform and lay down in the medical cabin. She felt a bit cold. As the door of the cabin was slowly closed, she couldn't help but recall the scene when her parents carried her around the hospital when she was little, clenching her fists reflexively. Along with the faint buzzing sound and the indistinct scanning light, her body grew colder and colder, and her fists were clenched tighter and tighter. She grew more and more nervous. She didn't even notice when the scanning was over. The door of the medical cabin was opened. Zhong Lizi walked out with the help of a nurse. She found the doctor had a strange expression while looking at the screen of the terminal. She couldn't help but feel more nervous, wondering if her condition had worsened. "Are you sure?" "Well, it's written in the medical record." The doctor lifted his head and looked at her, saying angrily, "The community hospitals under us are too irresponsible. They shouldn't have made such a mistake." "What's wrong?" asked Zhong Lizi, bewildered. The doctor thought it was not entirely the fault of the community hospitals, since the medical cabins used by the hospitals under them had been obsolete for more than 10 years. It was inevitable that they would make mistakes. He motioned for the nurse to fetch the blood-collecting apparatus and explained to her with a smile, "I'll tell you after I've confirmed your condition. You have to stay calm." This hospital was the affiliated hospital of the University of Stargate, one of the top 3 in the medical circle of the whole planet. It had all kinds of advanced equipment. It had been a long time since they had used the manual blood-collecting apparatus. The nurse took a long time to fetch it. The doctor put the blood-collecting apparatus on Zhong Lizi's arm clumsily and pressed the button. Zhong Lizi felt a slight pain on the inside of her arm. She saw her fresh blood flow into the blood-collecting apparatus through a thin pipe, soon reaching the size of a fingernail. The doctor put the collected blood sample into the analysis cabin and turned to her with a faint smile, saying, "Don't be too excited. I have a piece of good news for you. The community hospital might have made a mistake back then. You might not be a patient with the 4th type Y blood." Zhong Lizi didn't feel surprised, nor did she hear the thunder. She let loose a self-mocking smile. She was fully aware of her own condition, and it was evident that this kind doctor had made a mistake. "I've checked in 3 hospitals," she said softly, "and the community hospital was the last one." Her family was well off when she was born. They lived on the 5th level, where the medical facilities were much better than those in the underground neighborhood. Though they were not as good as the affiliated hospital of the University of Stargate, they shouldn't have made such a mistake. The doctor was taken aback. He opened her medical record again and found that what she said was correct. The results of the tests in the 3 hospitals were the same. She was a patient with the 4th type Y blood, and the record also showed that she had failed twice in the gene modification. What was going on? Was there something wrong with the medical cabin? It was deathly quiet in the room, save for the rhythmic sound of the rotating blood analysis cabin. The atmosphere grew extremely gloomy. It would take some time to check the blood directly, so the doctor asked her to go to the waiting room. It was probably because she had stayed in the medical cabin for too long that Zhong Lizi felt cold. She sat in the chair, her body shivering slightly. After a long while, the doctor came out with the results. "I've gone to the 3 hospitals to check your original medical records. What is going on?" He asked her in astonishment. "What happened?" asked Zhong Lizi nervously. "Maybe you need to stay here for a few more tests. I haven't figured out the reason yet, but I want to tell you, congratulations," said the doctor earnestly while looking at her. It took Zhong Lizi a moment to understand what he meant, and she couldn't help but feel bewildered. Her body started trembling uncontrollably, and tears started flowing down uncontrollably. Chapter 792. In addition to the exchange students from various places, many new students were going to visit the University of Stargate this time. The hospital became much livelier than before. The physical examination was a simple matter. All they needed to do was lie in the hospital cabin for a while. Soon, the students had all left, and the hospital had recovered its quietness. It wasn't until the dead of the night that the door of the laminar ward at the end of the corridor was opened. Zone Lizzie walked out from inside, a bewildered expression on her face, the tears stained still on her face. Before the door of the laminar ward was closed, a heated discussion or argument could be heard from inside, and a few white-haired professors could be seen waving their arms excitedly. The affiliated hospital was located on the east side of the lake at the University of Stargate, a long distance from the hotel. Yet, she didn't take a car. Instead, she walked toward the other side of the lake. It was unclear if it was because of the psychological factor or because her physical condition had improved, but her footsteps were much faster than usual, and the starlight she could see on the surface of the lake was much clearer than usual. She walked faster and faster as she thought of something. Soon, she arrived at the hotel. As she passed by the big trees by the swimming pool, she reached out her hand and patted them, as if she wanted to high-five them. With a soft beep, the elevator moved. Ding! The door of a room was opened. Jingjiu was lying on the chair on the deck, bathing in the stars, naked. She didn't even take a look at him before she jumped onto his body and kissed him. Jingjiu had guessed what had happened. He was fully aware of what a mental impact it was to get rid of the shadow of death. Many years ago, he had felt so happy when he was certain that he would be able to ascend after he had read all the books on cultivation collected by Shirua Peak. As such, he gave the girl with silvery hair a great deal of patience and tolerance. He allowed her to sit on his body and even let her kiss him. Yet this was the most he could do. As Zone Lizzie was about to continue kissing him, Jingjiu reached out a finger to press against the center of her brows and pushed her away from his body coldly. Zone Lizzie didn't struggle. She sat by his side obediently and held his hands with both of her hands. Seeing his pouting mouth, she was ready to cry to her heart's content. "Don't cry. Tell me," said Jingjiu. Zone Lizzie sniffled a few times and said while holding his hands, "I've recovered from my illness." Jingjiu uttered, Zone Lizzie was still feeling excited, so she didn't notice Jingjiu's calm reaction. "My condition is very good right now," she said. "The condition of my body is very stable. The professor said that it might be because the gene modification didn't fail completely, and it was activated for some reason. However, they still need to study it further." Jingjiu said, "Congratulations." The more Zone Lizzie thought about it, the happier she felt, but she also felt sad somehow. "Can't I hug you right now if I want to?" she asked indignantly. Jingjiu said, "It has nothing to do with me. Why are you hugging me? Don't try to take advantage of me." Having said that, he found that he talked a lot more than he did in Chaotian. To be more precise, Jingjiu had become more talkative after Nan Wang burned the corpse in the manor cave. Zone Lizzie said softly while staring into his eyes, "My life has changed a lot since I met you. It's getting better and better, and such a miracle has happened. Of course, it has something to do with you." She stood up and looked at the stars in the night sky. "I'll go to the fire-passing pagoda tomorrow to fulfill my vow and thank God for saving me," she said while putting her palms together. Jingjiu thought that she had thanked the wrong person. Zone Lizzie pulled back her gaze and said to him, "Come with me." "No," said Jingjiu. The next day, leaning against the wall and looking at the fire-passing pagoda on the opposite side, Jingjiu felt an itch on his back. It might be a psychological factor, or it might be because of the gravitational field in the administrative bureau. It was well known that Jingjiu had a natural sensitivity to anything that could threaten him. The fire-passing pagoda was a multi-story building. It was different from the Buddhist pagoda in Chaotian. It was more like the auction house in Nanhezu. Each story of this building was smaller than the one below it. The round windows welcomed all the wind and the believers, and the mottled stained glass could be seen. If the windows were open, one could see the sacred frescoes in the distance. He looked at the main hall of the praying hall on the third floor of the fire-passing pagoda. Zone Lizzie and other believers sat on the chairs and put their palms together, praying devoutly. Many married women in Chaotian would fulfill their vow, so Jingjiu was not a stranger to it. However, he thought that this little girl didn't have much money, and he didn't want her to be cheated too much, so he came here to have a look. More importantly, he had something else to deal with. The side door of the administrative bureau was opened. A few government officials walked out in a hurry, one of them holding a cup of drink in his hand. Jingjiu remembered clearly that it was this kind of drink that was provided in the passage leading to the underground. A middle-aged man in a thin windbreaker walked out with his head lowered. The golden hair under the brim of the windbreaker looked like messy straw. As the middle-aged man walked past Jingjiu, he suddenly halted his steps and looked at Jingjiu uncertainly, asking, "Is that you?" Jingjiu uttered, This golden-haired middle-aged man was Tanggu, a famous material scientist in the underground laboratory. He said with a bewildered expression in his eyes, "I've had a voice in my mind lately, telling me to come up here and find someone. I'm thankful that it's a kind of consciousness control, but why don't I resist it?" Jingjiu said, "Now that your consciousness is under my control, how can you resist it?" This statement sounded like nonsense, and it was still nonsense after listening to it. However, it was a necessity for the two-mind connection, a special method of the Zen sections. Even for Jingjiu, it was difficult for him to use the two-mind connection to control an intelligent being for a long time, so he had to strengthen it every once in a while. "Why do you want to come up here?" asked Tanggu. Jingjiu asked, "Has anyone seen the materials of my files recently?" Those files were stored in a special network. If he used the method of the cloud ghost to monitor them for a long time, he would have to write codes in them, which would be discovered sooner or later. For instance, some of the codes he had written on the battleship had been erased. However, he had set the codes to be sent out at a fixed time, and he had made enough information bridges in between. As a result, the military of the Federation couldn't find him by following the clues, and they were still investigating the matter internally. Shaking his head, Tanggu said, "The files are top secret to begin with. Nobody has asked about it since the dean came here once." Jingjiu thought that he would bring her to the Science Academy on the main planet after the Snow Girl found him, and try to find out more from the dean. Jingjiu waved his hand to signal for Tanggu to leave, looking like a delinquent student who was unwilling to accept the care of his parents. As Tanggu was about to leave, he suddenly halted his steps and looked at the pair of eyes that were not covered by the blue tracksuits. "Can I follow you?" he asked after some hesitation. "It's your need, not mine," said Jingjiu. Having said that, Jingjiu paid no more attention to this person, looking at the building on the opposite side of the street. Zonglizi was talking to a main preacher. It was the main preacher who had intended to teach Jingjiu. This main preacher had said the other day that following God was not the need of God, but the need of the believers. It was late at night, and the starlight looked like the water. Lying on the chair on the deck, Jingjiu looked at the inconspicuous star on the edge of the sea of stars. "What are you looking at?" After making sure that Jingjiu was wearing clothes, Zonglizi walked out with 2 teacups in her hands. Jingjiu took the teacup and had a sip. He was certain that the tea was not as good as Guqing's, but it was better than Jing Li's wife's. The tea was not as good, but the temperature of the water was suitable. "Do you believe in the existence of God?" Jingjiu had heard clearly the conversation between her and the main preacher that day. Zonglizi said after some thought, "I do." "Why?" asked Jingjiu. Zonglizi said earnestly while looking at Jingjiu, "The master preacher said that a miracle had happened to me recently because I had met an outstanding person." "And then," said Jingjiu, Zonglizi said, "You should bring the miracle to more people." "For example?" pressed Jingjiu. Zonglizi pressed, "For example, you should participate in the selection for the position of female priest." Jingjiu shot a glance at her and said, "The position of female priest." Zonglizi let out a mischievous smile and knocked the teacup in Jingjiu's hand lightly, saying, "You're so beautiful. No one can tell your gender." "But I know my gender," said Jingjiu. Zonglizi had gotten rid of the shadow of death and displayed the temperament of a young girl. "Is gender important?" she asked with arched eyebrows. "Not really," replied Jingjiu after some thought. For a person who had successfully ascended and had a long life and was devoted to the path toward heaven, the body and appearance were not important, let alone gender. Of course, it didn't mean that Jingjiu would participate in the selection for the position of female priest. It was because it was even less important. You haven't told me yet. What is there? You've often looked there, but there are no stars there. Zhong Lizi came to the railing of the deck with the teacup in her hand and looked at a spot in the night sky. There are many gods over there, said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi thought he was joking, but she felt bewildered when she thought of what the main preacher had said. Was what had happened to her a miraculous miracle? The expression in her eyes grew determined as she said, "Since you don't want to go, I'll go." She referred to the selection for the position of female priest. Back when she was in the apartment in the underground neighborhood, she thought that she would be able to witness the result of the selection for the position of female priest if she went to the University of Stargate as an exchange student. She decided to participate in the selection for the position of female priest. As far as the girl with silvery hair was concerned, this was undoubtedly the bravest and most important decision she had made in the last 16 years. The reason Zhong Lizi decided to participate in the selection for the position of female priest was mostly because her condition had suddenly improved and her life energy had erupted. Of course, it also had something to do with the conversation she had with the main preacher. What the main preacher had said seemed to be casual, but it was the praise for gods that could be found in the classics. In fact, he had guided her in an ingenious way. The officials in the imperial court and the preachers in the villages were good at this sort of thing, and they were much better at it than the scholars in Yamatai. Jingjiu had a clear understanding of this. That night, Jingjiu set up the inherited heaven sword formation and jumped down from the deck after making Zhong Lizi fall into a deep sleep. The wind in the tunnel of the floating train was soundless, but the wind in the tunnel made a whistling sound. Half a minute later, Jingjiu arrived at the most tranquil and expensive manor in Shou City and found the house of the main preacher. The first thing he did after eating was to pick up the chopsticks. He, of course, controlled the network of the villa and dismantled all the defenses. Like the plots in this world, the main preacher lived a luxurious life. His house was decorated with golden walls. If he were a child from the underground neighborhood, he would be enraged after seeing such a scene. Jingjiu was a child born in the royal palace and had lived a ferryman's life for 1,000 years, so he didn't feel anything. He waved his hand to make the main preacher fall asleep. After making sure that there was no self-destruct device in his brain, Jingjiu started reading his memory. He didn't want to turn the main preacher into an idiot, so he only employed the secret soul-searching method of the mysterious dark sect to the 4th level. In the perception of the secret soul-searching method, the main preacher's awareness was a patch of fog, and the scenes would appear in the fog from time to time. They were as chaotic as the popular stream of consciousness in this world. It was hard to find the objective truth, even if one read them directly. A gentle breeze drifted out from the thermostat, resembling the breeze on the prairie. It should have been infused with some kind of incense. A sword light came out from Jingjiu's eyes. The broken pieces of information had gradually formed a complete picture with the help of the sword awareness and the two-mind connection. Jingjiu didn't try to peek into the shadow of the main preacher's childhood. All he did was look at the boring and repetitive scripture recitation, meetings, and sermons in the last few days. He saw the pious faces of many believers and some personal affairs. In the next moment, he saw his blurry figure. It was the day the main preacher tried to preach to him. He also sensed the shock and anger of the main preacher. It was evident that the main preacher was stunned by Jingjiu's statement, "I am the God." Nothing unusual happened until the main preacher left Shou City a few days ago and went to the ground by flying device. He didn't see any scenes on the way. He was probably sleeping with his eyes closed or meditating to clear his mind. Jingjiu thought it was the latter. It was because the main preacher was in a tranquil and respectful mood when he left the flying device and walked into that huge building. The huge building was like a huge mountain standing in the deep part of the prairie. Its tip seemed to pierce through the protective shield of this planet and reach the distant permanent star. The inside of the building was spacious enough to accommodate a great many believers. However, when the main preacher walked in, he didn't find anyone there. A gray curtain hung in the deep part of the building, looking like the gray sky was placed vertically there. It was so huge that the regular people couldn't even see its edge. The main preacher knelt down before the gray curtain, like an ant facing the sky. A mild and peaceful voice came out from the curtain, like the decree issued by the God in the sky. Go and serve that youth. The main preacher's body trembled slightly as he asked, "That blasphemer?" The voice said, "God could be everything. Now that we are looking for him, why should we care about his appearance?" "What were you talking about?" the main preacher asked in surprise. The voice asked, "What is the last will left by the God before he left?" The main preacher said with his head lowered, "To find a new God." The voice said, "I think it's him." A dozen days ago, after I had finished writing that Jingjiu and Zhong Lizi were watching the primary selection of the female priest in the underground neighborhood, a friend of mine sent me a message saying that I must have devised a plot to let Jingjiu dress up as a man to fulfill his long-cherished dream of writing. Do you want to see him dress up as a woman? No way. I like watching it, but it doesn't mean I like writing about it. I really can't write about it. I suddenly thought of the Magic Apprentice. I wonder how Master Lan Jing is doing. I wish him well. Chapter 793. Due to the protective shield above the atmosphere and the airflow passage inside the planet, the temperature on the Stargate planet was relatively stable, with no obvious seasonal changes. The wild grass, the reeds, and the trees could all grow according to their will. This was a new civilization born from the dust of the distant ancient civilization, which hadn't formed its own order yet. This was probably the reason why this world didn't have many animals and plants, making it a bit monotonous. The yellowing of the ginkgo trees at the University of Stargate had nothing to do with the cold weather. It was because of the excessive rainfall. This planet had utilized the water resources to an extreme extent. There was not much water surface exposed on the surface of the planet, and the evaporation was insufficient. As a result, it seldom rained. It wasn't until July and August that the remaining patch of ocean on the ground brought some water vapor to the three great rifts along with the changing ocean currents that the continuous rain would continue until the end of October. The October water sacrifice came about as a result, and in the end, it had evolved into a ritual to worship the god. The October water sacrifice this year was quite special because the female priest would choose her successor. In the human federation of the Milky Way, the female priest had a transcendent status. She was the spokesperson of the god and the inheritor of the distant ancient civilization. It wasn't until now that few people knew what knowledge the female priest had inherited from the distant ancient civilization, but nobody dared disrespect this ancient tradition. Even the administrative committee of the Federation of the Milky Way and the military respected her for a long time. The selection of a new female priest was the most important event on the Stargate planet this year. The preliminary selection of the living quarters on various levels had already begun. Jiang Yuxiao was the winner of the first selection that Jing Jiu and Zhong Lizi had seen. As the drizzle fell down, the event had finally come to the second level, which was the closest to the ground. Show Earth City would select a candidate in the preliminary selection, and the other 7 cities would also select their candidates. Together with the candidates from various districts, they would enter the final selection. The selection of the female priest mainly tested the knowledge, moral character, cultivation state in martial arts, and willpower. The knowledge was mainly related to the history and humanities, and the other 3 tests were centered around the word tranquility. The anthropologists and historians of the Federation of the Milky Way had published many papers as to why the selection had to do with the word tranquility, but none of them had a definite answer. The female priest wouldn't explain anything related to them. The gray building of the University of Stargate was surrounded by people. Today was the registration day for the priestess primary selection, but most of the people were just there to watch the fun. Those who really had the courage to register were few and far between. They were all extremely famous genius girls in the school. The crowd suddenly became quiet, and countless gazes looked towards the road beside the lawn. The ginkgo leaves on the road had already been cleaned by the automatic cleaning machine. The surface of the Blackstone Road was extremely clean. A black-haired girl, and a silver-haired girl walked over. They were both beautiful, but had different temperaments. The people were baffled, thinking that Jiang Yuxia had already obtained the qualification for the third level of the Institute of Divinity. She had profound knowledge and a quiet temperament, and her cultivation state was in the golden state. She was the most popular candidate for the selection of the female priest this year. What was she doing here? Did he want to see who was his opponent? As they arrived in front of the building, Jiang Yuxia halted and asked Zhong Lizi, "Are you sure you want to participate in the selection of female priest?" Zhong Lizi uttered, Jing Jiao was a man of few words, but he had a great influence on those around him. All of them, be it Zhao Liu and Zhuo Ruzhui in Chaotian or Zhong Lizi here, resembled Jing Jiao in some way. Jiang Yuxia said while holding her hand, "You have to work hard then. I won't let you win." Zhong Lizi nodded and said, "Me too." Jiang Yuxia let go of her hand and said, "I wish you all the best." Zhong Lizi turned around and walked toward the building. It wasn't until then that the people learned that she was going to participate in the selection of female priest. They couldn't help but feel startled, looking at her back with a peculiar expression in their eyes. This gray building was the main second floor of the University of Stargate, where the offices of many departments were located, like the most important student office. The registration for the selection of female priest was done in the student office. The director of the student office was a mild-mannered official with white hair. Looking at the data retrieved from Zhong Lizi's bracelet by the terminal, he lifted his head after a moment of silence and said to her earnestly, "This is not the first time for the students down there to try, but nobody has ever succeeded. And some of them have lost their confidence and have fallen into depravity ever since." Zhong Lizi said, "I'm mentally prepared, and I have the courage." The director advised her earnestly while looking at her. "At some point, courage is meaningless. It's because it requires a miracle, but there are no miracles in this world." "Master Cui, there are miracles in this world," Zhong Lizi said earnestly while looking at him. "I'm sure of it." A few days later, the sky on the other side of the Great Rift Valley was dyed red. It didn't rain, and the morning sun couldn't be seen. It was still on the other side of the mountain. More than 100 students gathered at the front gate of the University of Stargate, ready to visit the university on the surface of the ground. Most of these students were the exchange students from various colleges and universities, but for some reason, the dozen female students who had registered for the selection of female priest were among them. Those female students were pretty and attractive in their own way, and their energy was as tranquil as the water. It was a pleasant sight to see them standing together. A few male students couldn't help but sneak a peek at them, but they didn't dare do so blatantly. Jiang Yuxia didn't stand with those female students. It was not because she was already a candidate, but because she was waiting for Zhong Lizi. Unexpectedly, the youth in the blue tracksuit came with Zhong Lizi. "Are you really a student of the University of Stargate?" he asked curiously. Jing Jiao didn't pay any attention to her. As long as he wanted to, he could be a member of the administrative committee of the Federation, to say nothing of being a student of the University of Stargate. Zhong Lizi explained, "He doesn't like to talk. Don't misunderstand him." Thinking of the encounter on the lawn that day, Jiang Yuxia let out a self-mocking smile and ignored Jing Jiao. She told Zhong Lizi in a low voice about the things to pay attention to in the primary selection of female priest. It was then that the director of the Student Affairs Office and 2 teachers walked over. His administrative position was quite high, but he led the team to visit the campus in person. It should have something to do with those young girls who would participate in the selection of female priest. It was unclear whether it was because there were too many people or for other reasons, but they didn't take the flying device. They took the floating train to Chunyuan instead. Walking out from the underground station, some exchange students from the underworld couldn't help but let out a faint cry when they saw the cliff wall that looked like a huge wall in front of them and the high-speed elevators moving between the cliffs. 2 young girls who would participate in the selection of female priest furrowed their brows slightly. It seemed that they were not satisfied with the arrangement of a university. Looking at the cliff wall and the elevators, Jing Jiao thought of the assassin in overalls. He followed Zhong Lizi into the elevator inconspicuously, wondering what that wild rabbit, with an unusual family background, was doing since he hadn't received any news from the hidden network for a long time. The high-speed elevators traveled at a high speed. They could even hear the whistling wind through the thick glass. It didn't take long for the elevators to arrive at the top of the cliff, which was the real surface of the ground. The visiting students walked out of the passageway. They couldn't help but be taken aback when they saw the scenery in front of them before they could say anything. In front of them was a grassland as vast as the sea, on which a few lonely big trees grew. A bright, red morning sun hung silently on the horizon in the distance. They had seen this scene on TV, but they had never seen it with their own eyes. It turned out that the horizon was actually a line. It turned out that the morning sun leaped out from the bottom of the line. It turned out that the sun could be so low. It wasn't until now that the visiting students realized why the university asked them to take the floating train instead of the flying device. It was because they needed to travel in the dark to remember the sun leaping out from their eyes. The visiting students still used the floating train to travel on the ground, but the floating train here was obviously more advanced than the one in Shoer City. It didn't have any track or connection, and it should be equipped with an expensive anti-gravity system. After they boarded the floating train, the students discussed it while looking at the grassland and the running monster herds outside the window excitedly. They were young people after all, and the unchanging scenery couldn't attract their attention for a long time. Soon, they pulled back their gazes and started discussing the tour that day in a low voice. Some of them fixed their gazes on a corner at the back of the carriage once in a while, especially those young girls participating in the selection of female priests who paid close attention to that corner. Jingjiu, Zhong Lizi, and Jiang Yusha sat in the back of the carriage. The blue, silvery, and black colors were eye-catching, but they were also in harmony. The attention came from their curiosity and vigilance toward Jiang Yusha and their puzzlement toward Zhong Lizi, and some were related to Jingjiu. Everybody at the University of Stargate knew that there was an abnormal youth wearing a blue tracksuit. The floating train passed through the vast grassland, a patch of forest, and a dozen lakes that were connected like pearls. Finally, it arrived at the end of the journey. Some buildings appeared on the horizon up ahead. The outer walls of the buildings were made of huge rocks, looking rather ancient. Some parts of the buildings looked a bit shabby, and the alloy structure could be vaguely seen. It was thought that these buildings were damaged by the invasion of the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter a few decades ago, but it was unclear why they hadn't been repaired yet. There was an exceedingly thin black line in the distant sky, extending from the ground to a high place in the sky. It was impossible to see the end of the line, and one could vaguely see something glowing at the end of the line. That is the No. 7 space elevator, which is connected to the Tianxian Space Transfer Station. 3 cargo ships unload their cargo there every day. A teacher explained to the students, this space elevator is used by the factory run by our university. It supplies about 14% of the food on the planet. Since the distant ancient civilization was reborn, the humans had expanded into the universe at an unimaginable speed. The Federation of the Milky Way had many planets with resources, and a great many cargo ships were sailing in the universe, transporting the resources from those planets to the main planet and other colonized planets. The problem of food supply had been solved a long time ago, but the problem of the taste of the synthetic food was still hard to solve. The students got off the floating train. The teachers and students of the university were already waiting for them, showing them around the buildings. Only a few departments of the University of the Milky Way were left on the ground, with a small number of students. It looked a bit desolate, but the historical significance exuded from those buildings was even more vivid. After visiting those ancient buildings and listening to a simple lecture in the History Exhibition Hall of the university, the students were led to another place. That building looked ordinary and square. Judging from its structure, it looked like a factory. Some people wondered if they were going to visit a synthetic meat factory. This is the number 3 laboratory of the mecha department. A student of the university said expressionlessly, "Don't touch anything carelessly after entering the laboratory. and don't disturb the work inside. Do you understand?" Hearing this, the visiting students couldn't help but feel nervous. Looking at the building, Jing Jiu sensed the unpleasant energy, knowing that there must be many gravitational field devices inside. After a strict examination and scanning, the students were led to the factory-like laboratory. The laboratory was spacious, with many cables exposed on the walls and many devices that the students didn't recognize. A railing surrounded the laboratory, and the floor inside was made of alloy, which seemed to cover a larger area than the grassland at the University of Stargate. The students thought that the railing was the passageway for the visitors, but unexpectedly, the alloy floor inside the railing opened up slowly after the student of the university pressed a button. Along with the buzzing electric currents and the deep thudding sounds, the underground world appeared in front of the students. There was a huge mecha in the underground. This huge mecha was dozens of stories high, about the same size as the hotel where Zhong Lizi stayed. Even though the students looked down from a high place, they would still feel that this mecha was exceedingly tall, and they would feel tiny in comparison. Dozens of small mechas and flying devices surrounded the huge mecha, and many people who looked like engineers were doing something with the terminals and devices in their hands. This is the thunder god that killed 3 monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter in the Battle of the Court Gate 2 years ago. The student of the university introduced. It was damaged severely during the battle, and it has been repaired after 2 years of maintenance. Right now, it is undergoing the final adjustment. In addition to the engineers of the military, a large number of students of our university participated in the maintenance. If you have the opportunity to enter the military department in the future, you can join them. The students had all watched the news 2 years ago and knew how terrible the Battle of the Court Gate was. They had heard of this famous huge mecha a long time ago, so they felt excited upon hearing this. Jingjiu looked at the huge mecha in silence, the ring on his finger emitting a faint glow. All of a sudden, countless surprise screams broke out in the laboratory. It was because the huge mecha had moved. A few faint green glows shot out from the helmet of the huge mecha, and thousands of components made a heavy but steady sound of turning. The huge left arm of the mecha lifted up slowly and aimed at the sky, as if it had come to life. Chapter 794. What's going on? What's going on? Who's in the control room? Nobody is there. The terminal is there. Old Wu, turn off the safety valve. Turn it off. Hearing the shouts of surprise and the chaotic sounds of running around the laboratory, watching the giant mecha suddenly move, the visiting students standing outside the railing were all dumbfounded. One of the female students was so shocked that she fainted immediately. No one knew what was going on, or why this giant mech called Thor would move without receiving any orders. It was chaotic in the lab. The student of Jingjiu University had a shocked expression on his face, and even the Dean Shui felt a bit panicked. Zhong Lizi was also nervous. She held Jiang Yuxia in her left hand and kept on comforting her, but her right hand grabbed Jingjiu's hand reflexively. Jingjiu came back to his senses and found that he had made too much noise. A sword light flashed in the deep end of his eyes, and the faint glow on the ring disappeared, turning into a regular ornament. A program flow in the computer in the lab had also disappeared soundlessly, leaving no trace behind. Only the tiny crack on the cable on the wall could prove that someone had done something to it. Along with the buzzing sound of the electric current, the light in the helmet of the huge mecha of Thunder God disappeared, and the huge left mechanical arm halted in midair, looking like a metal statue again. All the sounds in the lab had stopped running, and all the people were staring at the mecha with their mouths open and hair-grabbing. In the next moment, all the sounds started again. It stopped. It stopped. The safety valve has to be turned off. Old Wu, you idiot. Why are you in a daze? Get everybody out of here. Signed, the confidentiality agreement. Since such a significant event had occurred, the visiting couldn't continue. The Dean Shui led the students out of the lab as quickly as possible. He reminded them sternly for a long time that they couldn't tell anyone what they had seen that day. Zhong Lizi noticed that Jing Jiu was behaving strangely. He was absent-minded when such a strange and shocking event had occurred. He didn't listen to what the Dean Shui said, but looked at the white clouds and the blue sky, reflecting on something. Jing Jiu was thinking about how to destroy the giant mech known as Thor in the shortest time possible. This kind of huge mecha had an unimaginable power, which could easily destroy a battleship of the feather level and fight against the monsters of the sea of dark matter head-on. However, to him, this kind of huge mecha posed no threat at all. This was because the mecha's defensive strength was not strong enough to block his fingers and sword light. However, he still felt that he should make some preparations. In the hidden net and the military network, he had already grasped a lot of mecha-related knowledge, including some data on this thunder god. After all, the data and drawings on paper were not as direct as the real thing. This was probably the difference between antiques on the internet and the real thing in museums. He released his sword discernment to cut the cable on the wall of the laboratory and connected to the internal network through the ring. He quietly controlled the giant mecha and then carefully scanned the giant mecha with his sight. This was still not enough to completely grasp the overall situation of this giant mecha because it was too big and the various systems were too complicated. If this giant mecha were to start up and display the operation of the various systems, they would be able to observe it more closely. As such, the giant mecha was started up according to Jing Jiu's idea. It raised its right arm and pointed to the sky, causing chaos in the laboratory. It didn't take long before he pulled back his gaze from the white clouds. His understanding of the giant mecha had become much clearer than when he was still in the fog. The supercompressed energy was stored by the nuclear energy, which was also a weapon of fairy energy. The main method of attack was the high-energy light emitted by the crystals, which was very powerful, almost as powerful as the light grating of Bai Yuan. Of course, if Bai Yuan were still alive, she would be able to defeat 10 of these giant mechas. In the eyes of the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way, this kind of giant mecha could turn quickly, and its automatic aiming system was very advanced. But in the eyes of the swordsman in Chaotian, it was as stupid as a huge pig. Now that Jing Jiu had completely mastered the operation of the various systems of the mecha, all he needed to do was wave his hand to turn his opponents into a pile of scrap metal. Having made sure of this, Jing Jiu stopped thinking about this issue. He pulled back his gaze and followed the visiting students to the outside of the laboratory. It was still early when they arrived at the laboratory. The permanent star Silence was hanging in the sky, emitting a white light that made the grasses and trees look a bit pale. Fortunately, it was not too hot. The Dean Shui reiterated the rule of confidentiality again and announced that the students could visit the University of Stargate at will. All they needed to do was to gather at the Eastern Gate at 8 o'clock in the evening. The exchange students felt surprised, but they also felt relieved. Later, they found that this schedule had nothing to do with them, feeling a bit frustrated. The Dean Shui gathered the female students who had signed up for the selection of female priest and said, "I'll take you to visit the priest clan next. You should pay attention to the etiquette." The girls with black hair were surprised and delighted. They didn't know that the university had arranged such an important visit until now. Zhong Lizi was the only one whose hair was silvery. She was the only one who didn't realize the significance of this visit. She turned around to look for Jing Jiu, but found he was nowhere to be found. Not long after the floating train left the University of Stargate, it stopped in front of a valley. Many ancient buildings could be vaguely seen in the distance. The size of this manor was truly shocking. It was obvious that it was the residence of the priest clan. Led by a butler, the group came to the main building of the manor. A middle-aged man in the priest robe stood in front of the door, waiting for them. "Professor Shui, long time no see," he said to Dean Shui with a faint smile. "Mr. Xia, sorry for bothering you today," said the Dean Shui with a smile. It seemed that they were quite familiar with each other. Mr. Xia and the Dean Shui took their respective seats and started chatting. A dozen female students stood quietly in the surroundings, displaying an elegant and graceful demeanor. It was a rare opportunity for them to get in touch with the priest clan before the selection. To say nothing of the relevant information, they merely hoped to leave an impression on the other party. Through their conversation, they learned that this Mr. Xia was the head of the priest clan. They couldn't help but feel nervous, and a competitive mentality arose in their hearts. Some female students were in a bad mood after noticing Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia at the periphery of the crowd. Zhong Lizi's silvery hair was too eye-catching. What if the priest clan thought that the students of the University of Stargate were all like her? And Jiang Yuxia, you are already a candidate for the priest position on the 3rd level. Why do you have to follow us here shamelessly? Don't pay attention to them. They are all jealous of you. Zhong Lizi said to Jiang Yuxia in a low voice, you are prettier than them, and you are better than them in all aspects. They are afraid that you will steal their limelight. Jiang Yuxia let out a faint smile, her neat fringe swaying slightly, exposing her pretty eyes and brows. In that case, I'd better leave, in case they are in a bad mood, she said. Feeling baffled, Zhong Lizi asked, where are you going? I'm going to have a cup of tea and lie down for a while. Do you want to come with me? Jiang Yuxia invited her. Zhong Lizi felt speechless, thinking that this was the manner of the priest clan. Even if she didn't like those people, she shouldn't be so rude. Jiang Yuxia was aware of what was on her mind. This is my home, she said with an apologetic smile. Zhong Lizi opened her mouth slightly, feeling so surprised that she couldn't utter a word, wondering what kind of people she and Jingjiu were. The planet of Stargate was located at the forefront of the Federation of the Milky Way and the Sea of Dark Matter. It would be invaded once every few years. As such, the military rule on the planet was evident, especially on the surface of the planet. Apart from the buildings of the old era, there were no newly built human residences. A large number of prairies, deserts, and forests formed the main part of the scene. After leaving the University of Stargate and traveling 7,000 kilometers in the direction of the equator and passing through the second large crack, there was a more primitive and barbaric prairie. The prairie looked green, but if one dug up the soil, one would find that it had been severely desertified and many broken pieces of crystals could be seen. Those were the traces left by the invasion of the Sea of Dark Matter a few decades ago. It was believed that there were many broken pieces of the corpses of the heavenly demons of the outside world under the ground. Walking on the prairie, Jingjiu didn't bother to dig up the ground to look for those broken pieces. He walked onto a protruding sand dune ahead. A magnificent building suddenly appeared in the deep part of the prairie in the distance on the sand dune. The building looked similar to the fire-passing pagoda in Shoer City, but it was many times larger. The front of the building was supported by 17 huge stone pillars, on which some complicated lines were carved. The sudden appearance of such a building in the boundless prairie gave one a feeling of magnificence. Standing on the sand dune, Jingjiu looked in that direction in silence. He had seen this building in the awareness of the main preacher. The female priest was inside it. Chapter 795. Jingjiu wasn't in a hurry to go there. He observed it carefully for a while. The protective shield was located above the troposphere, which was why it couldn't block the rain or the wind. He reached out his finger to sense the wind speed, and soon calculated that the surface of the building should have been damaged more severely based on the erosion rate of the wind and rain. The traces of war on this prairie were evident, indicating that this place was the main battlefield of the invasion of the Dark Sea. But why was that building still preserved? The lines on the stone pillars were not the lines of the amulet scripts, nor did they have the fluctuation of the formation. It seemed that the inheritance of the female priest had nothing to do with the ascendants. The sand dune gradually moved up to his feet and then continued moving upward until it swallowed his body in the end. A moment later, the sand grains stopped moving, as if nothing had happened. In the deep end of this heavily deserted prairie, an intermittently visible glow appeared. The glow gave off an exceedingly sharp feeling, as if nothing could stop it from moving forward. With a soft hum, the light disappeared. The magnificent building was the main praying hall on the Stargate planet. It was similar to the fire-passing pagoda in other cities, except that it was hundreds of times larger. Perhaps it was because the female priest lived here, but this building didn't have too much of a modern civilization. Of course, it didn't mean that this place was primitive. However, the high-tech devices were all hidden in the huge rocks, like the devices that generated the gravitational field of the military level, which looked like a few stone statues. There were 7 meditation rooms on the east side of the praying hall, and a small Zen garden surrounded by 4 walls. There was an ancient well in the garden, and a few green bamboos were planted in the corner, looking indescribably beautiful when the sunlight shone down from the sky. Buzz! The water in the well moved slightly, and a figure flew out and landed in the middle of the few green bamboos. The bamboos looked a bit livelier. Looking at the few green bamboos, Jingjiu thought of the bamboos in the small village, the bamboos in front of the manor cave of Bairujing on the Tingwang Peak, and the bamboos that had been moved to the 3,000 nunnery by that kid. Jingjiu felt a bit livelier. With the protection of the sword Qi, even though he had traveled 200 kilometers underground, his blue sportswear was not damaged at all. Only the strap of his black backpack was worn out. He kneaded the worn tape into a wisp of green smoke, walked to the edge of the well, and looked down. After watching the gradually calming water for a while, he turned around and left. The main hall of the praying hall was unimaginably large. The dome was about 300 meters high, and the walls painted with the paintings of the distant ancient civilization and gods seemed to have no end. There was always an end, even if it was the universe. At the end of the hall was a gray curtain that hung from the dome to the ground. It was unknown what material it was made of, but its surface was extremely smooth, without a single wrinkle. If this was the representation of the sky, no one could raise any objections. On the other side of the gray curtain was a quiet and spacious stone room. Candles were lit on both sides of the stone steps, and there was sunlight shining in from an unknown source. There was a praying mat on the blue stone floor, the edges of which were badly worn. A black-haired woman was sitting on a praying mat. She was dressed in white ceremonial robes and had a golden belt around her waist that represented her noble status. The golden belt was as smooth as the curtain, devoid of any wrinkles. Her black hair fell down like a waterfall, but it was very regular and tidy, as if every strand of her hair had its own place and would never be overstepped. The woman had a mild expression on her face, her eyes and brows gentle. She exuded an aura of being aloof from worldly affairs and tranquil water. She was the most honorable and highest-ranking priestess on this planet. It was unclear how old this female priest was, but her eyes and brows seemed to indicate that she had been thinking too much. With the skylight gray curtain in front of her, this room seemed to have no dome, leading to the sea of stars in the universe. She sat here in silence, as if she had been sitting here for a great many years. There was no incense burning in the room, and the burning flames didn't give off any peculiar smell. There were no gorgeous decorations here, only a small bowl made of celadon placed in front of her. The ceramic bowl was filled with clear water, with 3 pink flower petals floating on the surface of the water. They were motionless, as if they were fake. A gust of gentle wind blew over from nowhere. The wind was so weak that it couldn't even tousle her hair or her clothes. It was impossible to even sense it. Yet, the flower petals on the surface of the ceramic bowl started drifting slowly. The female priest lifted her head to look at the gray curtain in front of her, her peaceful gaze showing a hint of excitement, as if she intended to see the truth of history from this patch of sky. No truth could be seen on the other side of the gray curtain, save for a figure. "Do you believe in the existence of God?" The female priest asked softly while looking at the figure on the curtain. "No," replied that person. Thinking of the conversation between this person and the main preacher in show or city, the female priest asked with a faint smile, "Why did you come here today?" "I have something to ask you." The person on the other side of the sky curtain was none other than Jingjiu. His voice was devoid of any emotion. The female priest knew that he wouldn't come in, so she didn't answer his question directly. The distant ancient civilization and the sea of dark matter perished together, But they arranged for their own resurrection and prepared countless methods, she said. They could know and calculate everything. Isn't it a god? Did that person really exist? Pressed Jingjiao. The priestess said, God does not need to prove his existence, but he has indeed left his footprints in the world. From the main planet to every colonial planet we have recovered, including the one you're standing on, his footprints are all there. Thinking of the Mecca buried in the mud in the warehouse of the museum, Jingjiao said, that Mecca is very backward. The female priest wasn't surprised that he could find the footprints left by God. Look, this is the so-called connection, she said with a faint smile. How did you know about me? Asked Jingjiao. He was certain that the information in the laboratory hadn't been leaked out. Even if some ascendants had noticed him through the path toward heaven and the twirling rain company, this female priest shouldn't have come to the conclusion that he was the new god. The female priest said softly, We've been looking for or waiting for you in the world for many years, so it's easy for us to notice some traces. As for the top-secret information of the military, it was not difficult for the female priests at the highest level of the belief chain in the Federation of the Milky Way to learn about it. When did you notice me? Asked Jingjiao. The female priest replied, From the moment you came to the laboratory. Jingjiao thought it was quite early, asking, How did you find me after I left? The female priest said with a faint smile, A rumor suddenly appeared in an underground neighborhood. It was said that a game hall was haunted. As you know, people like us are good at playing tricks on people, so we are very careful about such things. Jingjiao didn't continue this topic, asking, What is a female priest? We are responsible for passing on the distant ancient civilization. The female priest said softly, In the beginning, human beings didn't believe in what we said, and they even persecuted and hunted us down like witches. It wasn't until the civilization gradually recovered and many traces of the distant ancient civilization were discovered on various planets through archaeology that they accepted the existence of God. How do we pass on the teachings? Asked Jingjiao. The female priest replied, We don't leave any words. The priests of each generation pass it on by word of mouth, and then recite it in our minds every day, hoping that we won't forget any words. It sounded simple, but it was actually very difficult. The memory of human beings would decline, and what was more troublesome was that as time went by, many memories of the distant past would naturally disappear. Even after he was reborn as a sword, he had forgotten many of the scenes in the palace, let alone these ordinary female humans. If these female priests wanted to remember the knowledge passed on to them by their predecessors, they had to repeat it every day. The hardship was unimaginable. Only then did Jingjiao understand why the selection of priests valued literature and history so much, and he more or less understood the meaning of the word quiet. All the traces of the distant ancient civilization are in your memory. We are just ordinary human beings, but we can endure loneliness better than others. We are not omniscient and omnipotent gods, so how can we remember all the details of such a vast civilization? The female priest explained patiently. In the beginning, there were a total of 3,000 female priests, and now there are only 700 left. Every female priest only needs to remember their part of the teachings. What are you responsible for remembering? Asked Jingjiao. The female priest said softly, Besides the history and general knowledge that all the female priests have to remember, the content I'm responsible for is the least useful, is the art. Thinking of the famous art gallery in Shou, City, Jingjiao agreed with her modest statement. It was indeed useless. As for the history, it must be the dark age when the distant ancient civilization and the sea of dark matter perished together. What about the general knowledge? What does the new god mean? Asked Jingjiao. This was what he came here to do today. He had read the mind of the main preacher and knew that this female priest was looking for a new god. But why was she looking for a new god? He didn't need to think about it. Now that he was going to come to the surface of the earth, he might as well come here and ask her about it. As for the superior status and identity of the female priest on this planet, it was not something he considered. This was a secret known only to the female priests and their most trusted subordinates. Being exposed by Jingjio, the female priest didn't feel surprised at all. On the contrary, she became more respectful and bowed to the figure outside the screen. God was omniscient and omnipotent. The last will of the gods before they left was to ask the humans to wait for the new god to appear. Prostrating on the ground, she continued, "I've waited for many years until you appeared." "Why me?" asked Jingjio. The female priest replied, "Because you are omnipotent and you come from another world." Chapter 796. After a moment of silence, Jingjio said, "Tell me everything you know." "I'm sorry. I believe that you are the new god, but it doesn't mean that other female priests will. So, there are some things that I can't tell you yet." The female priest stood up and looked at the figure outside the curtain, saying calmly, "Of course, if you are the new god, you should be able to know what I'm thinking easily." Jingjio could grasp the knowledge inheritance in the female priest's consciousness through the two-mind connection or the soul-searching art. However, he confirmed through the scan that she had practiced some kind of passive mental secret method, which would cause problems once she was invaded. "Are there many people like me in this world?" he asked. The female priest didn't refuse to answer the question. "They have indeed appeared before." Jingjio asked, "What are their names?" The female priest said apologetically, "I only know that they exist, but I don't know who they are. Even if I knew, I couldn't tell you." Jingjio asked, "Why don't you think they're the new gods?" The female priest said humbly, "Because they are not as strong as you and can't lead mankind to resist the invasion of darkness. Also, they haven't been recognized." Jingjio asked again, "Whose recognition?" The female priest said, "If the one on the main planet thinks they are the new gods, he will let us female priests know. However, such a thing has never happened in the past hundreds of years." Jingjio knew that he couldn't get any more information from the female priest, so he turned around and was about to leave. Seeing the change of light and shadow on the curtain, the female priest knew that he was going to leave. She lowered her head again and didn't try to persuade him to stay. Jingjio suddenly stopped and asked, "I saw a sunflower painting in the art gallery." The female priest said, "It was an imitation by one of my former female priests. It's not the real one." Jingjio asked, "I don't think that painting is right. Those flower branches should be scattered. What's the flower branch in the original painting?" The female priest thought that he was the new god again. She said respectfully, "The real painting is on the main planet. You can go and see it." Jingjio didn't expect that he wouldn't get an answer. He asked, "Is it inconvenient to say?" The priestess replied, "Yes, because the artist of that painting is not an ordinary ancient civilization artist. It is said that it is God's sister." Jingjio turned around and fixed his gaze on her face through the curtain, asking, "Does God have a family?" The female priest said, "God is human, so he naturally has a wife, a younger sister, and a family." No sound came from behind the sky-like curtain. The petals on the surface of the green porcelain bowl moved slightly. Jingjio left. The priestess reached out her slightly trembling finger and dipped it into the petal water. Then, she slowly rubbed the space between her brows. She looked calm, but she was actually extremely nervous. Because this was a conversation with God. "I haven't been home for a long time. That Mr. Xia just now is my uncle." Jiang Yuxia led Zhong Lizi to a separate building in the manor. She led Zhong Lizi to the bedroom on the third floor and sat in a chair, displaying a relaxed expression. Seeing the luxurious bedroom and the expensive items she had only seen on TV, Zhong Lizi couldn't help but exclaim in her mind. Thinking of the conditions of the dormitory at the university, she felt a bit embarrassed. Jiang Yuxia was a talented girl from the priest clan, and she was almost like a princess on this planet, but she lived in the dormitory like a regular student. Zhong Lizi, a regular girl from the underground neighborhood, lived in a comfortable hotel. Well, she thought of Jingjio and thought it was not a big deal to enjoy life with that guy. But what should she say at the moment? Zhong Lizi looked at the black-haired girl sitting in the chair as if she were sitting by the lake while hugging her knees. She felt a sense of yearning and nervousness. The door of the room was knocked on. A servant girl came in with a small cart and brought in the tea and snacks. "Young mistress, what should we do for dinner?" she asked. "My uncle will have dinner with Dean Shui and other students. Do you want to eat with them?" asked Jiang Yusha while looking at Zhong Lizi. Thinking of the gazes of those young girls, Zhong Lizi asked, "What do you think?" Jiang Yusha smiled faintly and motioned for the servant girl to bring the dinner to the room. After the servant girl left the room, it grew quiet again. The atmosphere grew a bit awkward. Zhong Lizi was certain that it was not her fault this time. Jiang Yusha was like the spring breeze, making everybody feel comfortable. She would never allow the awkward atmosphere to take place. Normally, she should have taken the initiative to tell Zhong Lizi about the manor house, her childhood life, and the fact that she had no choice but to hide it from Zhong Lizi. But why did she remain silent for such a long time? "I don't want to act anymore." Jiang Yusha suddenly stood up and came before Zhong Lizi. She said this while staring into her eyes, her voice full of determination and determination. Zhong Lizi's heart skipped a beat, thinking that she shouldn't do this. "Well, I know you know the relationship between me and the Twirling Rain Company and that I might be your rival to become the female priest. That's why you came here to get to know me and learn about me. But what's the big deal?" Zhong Lizi had finally found a friend, but she said that she didn't want to act anymore in less than 2 days. "You haven't even found out about me and the real author of the novel, and you haven't even won my affection. You don't want to act anymore? Can't you act for a few more days? Even if you are acting, you are still a friend." "I don't want to be the female priest," Jiang Yusha said earnestly while looking at her. "Can you help me?" As Zhong Lizi was about to tell her that she had her reasons, she suddenly came back to her senses. She looked at her blankly, not knowing what to say. This was the secret she wanted to tell her. Zhong Lizi felt relieved, but she soon felt puzzled, wondering why she didn't want to be the female priest. Zhong Lizi suddenly recalled the scene when Jiang Yusha looked at Jing Jiu on the lawn under the tree that day. She suppressed the jealousy in her heart and said hesitantly, "The priest can also get married." Jiang Yusha came to the deck and looked at the green lawn of the manor house. She smiled faintly as if she had thought of something. "I'll get married, of course, but it has nothing to do with this. I just don't want to be the female priest," she said softly. Zhong Lizi came to her side and asked concernedly, "Why?" Jiang Yusha turned to her and said while staring in her eyes, "It's because I don't want to be the puppet of my clan." Before Zhong Lizi could respond, Jiang Yusha continued softly, "Our clan exists to serve the female priest for many years. We have been accompanying the female priest all the time. As time goes by, it's inevitable that we will have other ideas." After some thought, Zhong Lizi thought it was natural and should be understood. "It has been the wish of my clan for more than 10 generations to have a female priest, and I'm the most promising descendant of this generation. I've received relevant education since I was a child, and it looks like I'm the most likely candidate to succeed." Jiang Yusha went on, "I don't know why. Maybe I've been taught to be the next female priest since I was a child. I've heard and practiced a lot, so I've developed a rebellious mentality. All in all, I don't want to accept their arrangement." After some thought, Zhong Lizi thought it was reasonable and understandable. "Are you going to perform poorly in the selection and not be selected?" she asked. "The education I've received since I was young doesn't allow me to do something so rude. Since I'm participating in the selection, I have to give it my all. That's the only way to show respect to everyone, including my opponents." Staring into her eyes, Jiang Yusha said earnestly, "I had planned to leave the university before the selection began. That's why I came to the University of Stargate as an exchange student." Zhong Lizi couldn't understand this idea at all, wondering if fleeing was better than pretending to be defeated. Then he thought of something else and said, "Just now, Mr. Xia, your uncle said that after you become a priestess, you will go to the main star to visit the only ancient civilization ruins and receive training related to the priestess. Can't you leave at that time? If I really become a priestess, there will naturally be people from the priestess family accompanying me. Don't forget, they're all my family. It will be even more inconvenient for me to leave." Jiang Yusha said while holding her hand, "It's fortunate that I met you." Zhong Lizi asked with widened eyes. So, Jiang Yuxia said earnestly while looking at her, since you want to become a female priest, you have to succeed. Having said that, Jiang Yuxia handed over a storage device the size of a fingernail, saying, all the lessons related to the priestess I've received since I was little are in there. Zhong Lizi took the storage device and exclaimed in bewilderment, lessons? Everything you can think of is in there, including the dining etiquette, the attitude when meeting the officials of different states, the posture when walking, and even the choice of bedding. Zhong Lizi felt speechless. All she wanted to do was to find a goal in life after her incurable disease was miraculously cured. She didn't expect it to be so troublesome. Jiang Yuxia suddenly thought of something and asked, where is your friend? Zhong Lizi was aware that she was asking about Jingjiu, saying, that guy often disappears all of a sudden. Don't worry about him. He will suddenly come back in a few hours or a few days. Jiang Yuxia asked after some hesitation, what kind of person is he? My family knew he was your friend, so they had investigated him in secret, but they didn't find any information. And they received a warning from a certain place, so they didn't dare investigate further. Zhong Lizi thought the warning came from Jingjiu's family. As she was about to say something, she suddenly heard an indifferent voice behind her. It's fine as long as you don't investigate. The two of them spun around in surprise and found Jingjiu sitting in a chair, drinking tea from a teacup in his hand. That teacup is mine, Zhong Lizi said angrily. It was unclear what kind of emotion she was feeling. Jingjiu set down the teacup and said to Jiang Yuxia, you should choose your own path in life. Don't do anything you don't want to do, but don't pin your hopes on others. Jiang Yuxia met his sharp gaze and said in a low voice, I know what you're worried about, but I really consider her a friend. Why? Asked Jingjiu. Jiang Yuxia said with a slightly red face, my family asked me to get to know her because they knew the Twirling Rain Company attached great importance to her. But I simply like her. Pass, said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi was taken aback, wondering how he had passed the test. Jingjiu stood up and led Zhong Lizi to the outside of the deck. In the next moment, they arrived at the other end of the lawn in the manor. Jiang Yuxia ran to the deck and looked at the two figures disappearing into the distance, feeling envious. The youth wore a blue tracksuit, and Zhong Lizi wore a dark red school uniform. The two of them walked side by side, looking quite harmonious. By the time they returned to the hotel in Shou City, it was already late at night, and the stars were shining brightly in the sky. Jingjiu didn't want to miss it, so he started bathing in the starlight that day. Zhong Lizi had developed some resistance to the perfect body under the starlight. She sat on the other end of the chair with the teacup in her hand and said earnestly, I want to be a female priest. It has nothing to do with her. Don't blame her. Thinking of the conversation he had with the female priest that day, Jingjiu pulled back his gaze from the starry sky and said to her, being a female priest has a hard life. Zhong Lizi said with a smile, how hard can it be? Can it be worse than what I have experienced over the years? I can't have children, said Jingjiu. I've never thought of having children. Zhong Lizi said softly, my illness is hereditary. Even if I'm lucky, my children might not have the same luck. Chapter 797. Who would know best whether being a priestess was tough or not? Of course it was herself. The female priest had the highest status in the Federation of the Milky Way and was respected by the people. She didn't need to pray for blessings and only needed to attend some important occasions once in a while. She could even choose her vacation time at will, except that she couldn't take part in dangerous activities, such as taking part in the tour group to observe the stellar storm at a close distance. This sounded like the perfect life, but in fact, the priestess needed to learn a lot of knowledge about the ancient civilization and repeat it every day to ensure that she would not forget it. How could she have the time and energy to enjoy life? Due to the widespread gene modification, the average person in the Federation of the Milky Way could live more than 100 years. The female priest that Jingjiu saw that day was probably less than 40 years old, but her life force was extremely weak, and a successor had to be selected. It was because she had to bear such a mental exhaustion all year round. Zone Lizzie wished to be a female priest, but could she withstand such pressure? In the long years, many priestesses must have met with accidents or chosen to give up. The knowledge of the ancient civilization then disappeared. Would she be the next one? Jingjiu had thought that the most important issue was that the female priest could fall in love and get married like regular people, except that they couldn't have any offspring according to the rules. He didn't expect Zone Lizzie to think this way. Though he was surprised, he didn't care too much about it. The cultivation practitioners in Chaotian wouldn't leave any descendants of their bloodline unless they were certain that they couldn't ascend. Even before the emergence of Taiping Zhenren, cultivators did not have a strong desire to take in disciples. Zone Lizzie went to take a rest. Jingjiu looked at the starry sky again, reorganizing his conversation with the female priest that day. Since the other party knew that he came from another world, it should be the so-called instructions of the gods, which was also a saying left behind from the ancient civilization. It seemed that both the Federation of the Milky Way and Chaotian were left behind when the distant ancient civilization and the Sea of Dark Matter perished together. That's right. It's not tossing from one side to the other, and it's not tossing from the other side to the other. It's two completely different paths. If this was arranged by someone in the distant ancient civilization, it was no wonder that he was regarded as a god by those female priests and the people in the Federation of the Milky Way. Such extravagance was indeed close to that of a god. It was rare for Jingjiu to admire that person. If he wanted to get to the bottom of all this, it seemed that he really had to make a trip to the main planet to take a look at the strictly sealed ancient civilization ruins and meet the person that the priestess had mentioned. However, the Snow Girl hadn't arrived yet. He didn't know who the ascendant hiding in the Federation of the Milky Way was, and he hadn't figured out the paths of those warped voids. If he could only follow Zone Lizzie, it would be dangerous for him. Thinking of all this, he got up and came to the bedroom. He picked up the memory card given to him by Jiang Yuxia and spent a few minutes reading it. Then, Jingjiu employed his sword source and recited the two-mind connection method, placing his hand on Zone Lizzie's head. Zone Lizzie had a dream. In her dream, she saw God. He couldn't see the face of the god clearly. Just like those murals in the fire-passing pagoda, he would forget how to describe the face when he turned around. But she knew it was God. God asked her, "Are you willing to follow me for the rest of your life and serve me as a priestess?" She hummed, then realized that it was very disrespectful, so she quickly said, "I do." Next, God told her that the work a priest had to do was very arduous and boring. Though they were respected by the people, they had no interest in living. God also told her that he had experienced this kind of boredom many times, and that it was indeed not fun. Zone Lizzie felt that God's words were quite amiable. As such, she plucked up her courage and asked if she could resign if she couldn't stand being a priest. In the long history of the revival of the human race, many female priests had chosen to give up or even spread the knowledge of the distant ancient civilization to the outside world because they couldn't bear the responsibility. However, they died as soon as they had this idea. Zone Lizzie was unaware of all this. She looked at God expectantly with widened eyes. It seemed that God didn't expect her to make such a request. "Suit yourself," he said after some thought. Having said that, God left. The whole space became very warm, exuding a red glow. Zone Lizzie felt very comfortable soaking in the red glow. The scalding feeling gave her an odd idea, as if she were bathing in the lava. After a long while, she opened her eyes and woke up. What had happened in the dream seemed to happen in front of her eyes, but in fact, what she saw was the ceiling of the living room. Zone Lizzie's sleep quality had improved since she met Jingjiu. It had improved a few days ago, but it was not as good as it was that day. She felt that her body was full of vitality and an unknown force. She even vaguely felt that many things had appeared in her mind, but she didn't know what they were. The clean water flowed out, giving off hot steam. Standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom and looking at her slightly flushed face, she thought it looked pretty. In the next moment, she found something. She reached out her hand to pull out her silvery hair. To her surprise, she found that the roots of her hair had darkened, looking a bit mottled. The electric toothbrush gave off a buzzing sound. She thought of the changes in her body while brushing her teeth, feeling it odd. After washing up in a hurry, she drank 2 mouthfuls of water from the water pipe and went to the deck. "I feel that you've been doing something to me," she said while looking at Jingjio lying in the chair. She, of course, knew that there was something wrong with Jingjio. He was a youth who had never gone to bed and preferred to stay in the chair on the deck, a youth who would lie on the lawn even if it was raining. If he was not a rare abnormal person, then he was definitely not an ordinary person. "Toothpaste foam," said Jingjio while looking at her face. Zhong Lizi wiped her face reflexively, but found nothing. She knew that he was not teasing her, but that he didn't want to explain it to her. She pouted and turned around, saying, "I'm going to the barber shop after school. You wait for me on the lawn." Jingjio didn't like it, asking, "Why do you all have to cut your hair short?" Zhong Lizi said happily, "The new hair is grown out, so I'm going to dye it." Due to her illness and the failure of her gene optimization, her hair had always been gray and mottled since she was a child. It was ugly, so after she entered junior high, she used the money she saved to dye her hair silver, which she had done until now. Hair dyeing was not a government benefit, so she had to pay for it herself. It had been her biggest expense over the years. Her new hair had grown out today, but it was a healthy black color. She was certain that she had recovered from her illness, so she was in a good mood. "Let's change the color," said Jingjio. Feeling surprised, Zhong Lizi asked, "Then what color do you like?" "Red," replied Jingjio. Zhong Lizi suddenly thought of the red light and lava in her dream the night before. Though she had agreed to it in her mind, she didn't want to agree so easily. She intended to make things difficult for him. "There are many kinds of red," she asked while rolling her eyes slightly. Jingjio had spent 3 years surfing the internet, so he had read a great deal of useful and useless knowledge. "Red velvet," he replied casually. That guy didn't care about anything, but he cared about the color of her hair. Was it possible? While thinking of all this, Zhong Lizi looked at the distance outside the window, at the lawn and the drizzle and the eye-catching blue dot. She couldn't help but feel delighted. This class was about the ancient history, talking about the early days of the Federation of the Milky Way. The female professor lectured expressionlessly, and the students listened to her expressionlessly. The whole classroom was filled with a feeling of boredom and drowsiness. The students at the University of Stargate were all outstanding students, and their families were quite wealthy. Most of them had received the basic knowledge at a young age, so they could recite the ancient history fluently. As such, they had no interest in listening to the class. The female professor had no interest in lecturing either. However, she still felt displeased when she noticed that Zhong Lizi, an exchange student from the underground neighborhood, was so absent-minded. Pinji State, the last stronghold of the Na 6 dynasty in the Northern Valley, has 3 heavy laser cannons. How did the army of the Federation break through the defense? The female professor fixed her gaze on the window and said expressionlessly, "Student Zhong Lizi, you answer the question." The depressing atmosphere in the classroom suddenly became lively. A dozen gazes fell on Zhong Lizi. If it were before, nobody would care even if she didn't answer the question. But the situation had changed. Everybody knew that she had signed up for the selection of female priest, and they had discussed her in private. They wanted to know why this exchange student from the underground neighborhood was so confident. The gazes were full of suspicion, curiosity, and a hint of hostility. Zhong Lizi came back to her senses after being taken aback, wondering what was going on. Jiang Yuxiao repeated the question given by the teacher to her in a low voice. Zhong Lizi thought that this should be the content taught by the students of the military history department. She said, "Teacher, the textbook doesn't mention the details of the battle in the Northern Valley." The female professor was still expressionless, as she said, "If you only need to recite the contents of the textbook, why do you come to the University of Stargate? Take your classmates as an example. Do you think they don't have to come to class?" Zhong Lizi felt helpless. As she was about to apologize and sit down, a light suddenly flashed in her mind, and a few lines of words appeared. She recited reflexively, It's because of the supporting structure of the new M laser cannon. Chapter 798. In the beginning, Zone Lizzie didn't feel comfortable hearing those words being repeated. She often paused in her sentences and stuttered a bit. As time went on, the memories in the deep part of her consciousness resurfaced. She spoke more fluently, and her voice became clearer. The atmosphere in the classroom changed again. The students looked at her in surprise, wondering what was going on. The female professor didn't expect Zone Lizzie to remember such an obscure historical knowledge. "Very well, sit down," she said with a slightly relieved expression. Zone Lizzie had no idea what had happened. She was still baffled even after she sat down, and she couldn't help but rub her hair a few times. Jiang Yusha said to her with a faint smile, "It looks like you've been studying diligently lately. I think more and more highly of you." Zone Lizzie didn't know how to explain it. She had indeed studied diligently, but she had never read this book. "Have you read the things I gave you yesterday? There are a lot of them. If you want to master them all before the October Water Festival, you have to hurry up," said Jiang Yusha softly. Along with the pleasant electronic music, the buildings on the campus glowed again, illuminating the woods and the grassland amid the drizzle. Zone Lizzie walked to the grassland with the folder containing the computer on her head. Thinking of the contents of the computer she had read during the break of class, she felt more bewildered and even shocked. The materials given to her by Jiang Yusha were indeed very detailed, including all the things needed to become a female priest. Yet, she felt that she had seen them somewhere before, and the feeling grew stronger the more she read them. She even thought that she was born with them. What was going on? Jingjiu had already walked out from the grassland and stood by the path, waiting for her. He didn't hold an umbrella, merely covering his face with a hat. She came before him and stared into his eyes, the only part of his body that could be seen for a long time. Jingjiu uttered nothing. Zone Lizzie changed the topic awkwardly. "You told me not to bring this computer to school, but I forgot about it. Why didn't you remind me?" "I forgot about it too," said Jingjiu. The drizzle kept on drizzling soundlessly. October arrived. Over the last few days, Zone Lizzie had been training according to the requirements of the materials provided by Jiang Yusha, and she didn't slack off in her studies. Jingjiu was still lying on the grass in the rain, waiting for the battleship to hit him. At night, he would do math problems under the starlight or read the proceedings of the Academy of Sciences. As far as he was concerned, doing the mathematical problems and reading the collection of theses were the same as playing the sandpiling game in Chaotian. They were both a form of relaxation and a form of exercise, and it was also a process of calculating. Yet, it was unclear what he was calculating. One day, the rain suddenly grew heavier and more chaotic. It was probably because too many flying devices had left Shore City at the same time. Today was the day of the October Water Sacrifice, where a new priestess would be chosen. Thousands of spacecrafts left the ground and flew against the rain line. Under the command of the spacecrafts, they followed the temporary flight path that was applied for on the spot and flew toward the majestic mountain range. More people had set off early in the morning, taking the floating trains and other public transportation tools, taking the elevators to the ground, and then taking the equatorial train to the praying hall. There were 7 big cities like Shore City on this planet, to say nothing of the many residential areas. Hundreds of thousands of people had gathered on that patch of grassland during the daytime. It was unclear if those people had realized that the decertified ground under their feet had many traces of the last war when they were strolling in the rain. The magnificent building of the praying hall in the deep end of the grassland was surrounded by a sea of people. Some advanced flying devices landed one after another in the evening. It was a magnificent scene. A few battleships hovered 3,000 meters above the ground and shot out hundreds of strong light beams, illuminating the entire patch of grassland. The praying hall was illuminated by a dozen light beams, looking exceptionally clear and solemn. It was illuminated by the lights of the battleships. Only the birth of the priestess was worthy of such a grand occasion. Jingjiu rode the floating train with the students. After being scanned a few times, he came to the outside of the praying hall and waited in line to enter the hall. The important figures like the president of the University of Stargate and the council members were talking to others in the square in front of the praying hall. Few people would come to the praying hall under normal circumstances, because nobody dared disturb the priestess cultivation. However, the most important figures on this planet were gathered here at the moment. The director of the military base, the chief executive of the government, the heads of the clans, the presidents of a few large companies, and a dozen archbishops of high status were all standing in the square. Some high-level officials of the government and the high-level members of the priest clan, represented by Mr. Xia, were also talking to them. Some people were more attractive than them that day. There were the 100 young women standing on the stone steps of the sacrificial altar. There were strict requirements for participating in the selection of the female priest, though some of them were not suitable to be announced to the public. For instance, they couldn't be older than 18 years old, and these young women had beautiful eyebrows and a tranquil temperament. They wore white priest robes, their black hair hanging down their backs, giving off a feeling of holiness and purity. Standing on the stone steps in silence, they were not affected by the clamor of the outside world and the battleships in the sky. Only one young woman was special. She was Zone Lizzie. Her hair was dyed red, which was very eye-catching among the young women, looking like a burning flame. Her special appearance drew some attention. A few archbishops furrowed their brows, showing their displeasure. A few high-level officials discussed her with a smile. It was probably because of this that Zone Lizzie felt nervous. She lost her balance and almost fell to the next stone step. Standing by her side, Jiang Yuxiao reached out her hand imperceptibly to help her regain her balance. Why is she standing there? Seeing the scene, Mr. Xia asked his subordinate by his side with furrowed brows. He had arranged for Jiang Yuxiao's position to be the most eye-catching. Her tranquil temperament and beautiful appearance would definitely attract many people's attention. Why was the young woman named Zone Lizzie standing by her side? And she dyed her hair in such a strange color. Who arranged for her to do so? It's the young mistress's request, said his subordinate in a low voice. Mr. Xia furrowed his eyebrows even more tightly, wondering how she could behave in such a manner even though she was a candidate for the position of female priest. In the next moment, he saw the scene in the distance, feeling baffled, wondering who the youth in the blue tracksuit was. Everybody was looking at the young women on the stone steps, including those high-level officials and the heads of the aristocratic clans. Only 3 of these young women would enter the final list, and then the female priest would choose the successor. Those who had been eliminated would be the best candidates for their daughters-in-law. The male representatives from various institutes, departments, and regions had their eyes fixed on the young women, feeling that they couldn't get enough of looking at them. After taking a look at Jiang Yuxia, Jing Jiu fixed his eyes on Zone Lizzie, ignoring the other girls with black hair. He was quite satisfied with the hair color he had chosen for this young woman. It was bright red, looking like the sword light of the thoughtless sword. The teachers and students of the University of Stargate entered the hall. Jing Jiu followed them without being noticed. The students who came to the praying hall for the first time couldn't help but scream in surprise when they saw the spacious hall, wondering how long they would have to walk before they could find their seats. The surprise screams drew the attention of the important figures in front of the praying hall. When they learned that he was a young man of the University of Stargate, they all let out a mild and tolerant smile. The main preacher of Show, Earth City, had a slightly changed expression when he saw Jing Jiu. Though he couldn't see the face of this youth, he couldn't forget the blue tracksuit. The priest's uniform drooped down to the ground, covering his moving feet. He came to the side of Jing Jiu and hid in the shadow behind the stone post. "You're here," he said in a humble tone. Jing Jiu didn't expect to be seen by this person, uttering The main preacher asked with his head lowered, "Where would you like to sit?" The few battleships were only a few thousand meters above the ground, exuding a strong gravitational force that made Jing Jiu uncomfortable. In order to launch a counterattack as soon as possible, Jing Jiu pointed upward. The main preacher didn't dare voice his opinion. He led Jingjio into the hidden corridor behind the stone post hastily. It was this scene that Mr. Xia saw. As the head of the priest clan, he was aware that this main preacher of Shou City was the most trusted person of the female priest, and he was also aware of the relationship between the youth in the blue tracksuit and Zhong Lizi. He suddenly felt alarmed and uneasy. His clan had prepared for more than 100 years and had finally produced such an outstanding descendant as Jiang Yuxia. Would something unexpected happen today? The October water sacrifice had already begun during the day, and the selection of the female priest would take place at this moment. Along with the tinkling sound of the spring water, a main preacher stood in the spacious grand hall and welcomed all the distinguished guests and populace. In the next moment, the governor and the manager of the base gave a speech respectively. Mr. Xia also gave a brief speech on behalf of the priest clan. A dozen black-robed main preachers and female caretakers walked out from the hidden corridors on both sides of the praying hall and knelt on the ground. The high-level officials, including the governor and the manager of the base, and thousands of populace representatives had all left their seats. A beam of light illuminated the gray screen in the deepest part of the praying hall. The gray screen hung down from the top of the praying hall to the ground. It was so large that it could be seen clearly from the entrance of the praying hall a few thousand meters away. It was said that this screen was made of a nanomaterial of the second level, devoid of any fine lines on its surface. It was so smooth that it looked like a dreamland or a real sky. A slender figure appeared on the screen. She was the female priest of the Stargate. Everybody knelt down and bowed to the figure behind the gray screen. The preachers began to recite the scriptures, praising God for rescuing the humans from the ruins of destruction. In the meantime, the scene in the praying hall was projected to the night sky by the battleship in real time. Hundreds of thousands of populace knelt down like the tide on the prairie. It was a spectacular scene. The whole world was bowing to God and the spokesperson of God. Jingjio, of course, didn't do it, because nobody could see him anyway. At the moment, he was at the highest point of the praying hall, by the edge of the gray screen. It was unclear when he pulled a chair over and lay on it. This was the highest and the best position. It was the closest to the real sky and the sky-like screen. As the light illuminated the screen, the sky turned into something like water. Jingjio turned his head to look down and saw a young woman in a military uniform kneeling by the stone post behind the screen. He couldn't help but be taken aback. Chapter 799. Huaxi, 15 years old, Tsinghua Ladies College, Level 12 of the Fire Observing State from Tai City. Chunji Xiao, 17 years old, Sibon University, Level 10 of Fire Observing State from Sibon Special City. Mo Zong, 18 years old, affiliated University of the Base, Golden State from District 2. As a main preacher introduced them, 3 young girls who would participate in the selection of female priests walked in from outside the praying hall and headed toward the grand hall along the long platform carved with complicated patterns. On the surface, the order of these female priestess candidates was random, but everyone knew that there was a problem. This was because the 2 girls, Hua Shi and Mo Zong, were the candidates that were highly favored this time. Jiang Yuxia, 16 years old, studying at the Institute of Divinity and an exchange student at the University of Stargate. She is in the Golden State and comes from a priest clan. As expected, the 4th person introduced the most popular candidate for the selection of the female priest. Countless gazes landed on the black-haired girl who had a serene temperament and walked silently. It wasn't until today that many people learned that she had the direct bloodline of the priest clan. The teachers and students of the University of Stargate and the Divinity Institute couldn't help but scream in surprise. Following the voice of the main preacher, the candidates entered the praying hall one after another, walking forward along the long platform. No matter how much attention was focused on them, they remained calm and undisturbed. A total of 100 candidates for the priestess selection were selected from the primaries of the various districts of the planet. The names, realms, educational backgrounds, and even family backgrounds of these 100 girls have long been reported by various news media. There are no secrets at all. As the name of Zhong Lizi appeared, it drew the attention of many people. Zhong Lizi, 16 years old, studying at the New Era Institute and an exchange student at the University of Stargate. She is at the 11th level of the fire-observing state from the Mingxia neighborhood. For many years, the people living in the dark and boring underground streets all wanted to change their living environment and social class, and they had put in a lot of effort to do so. Becoming a priestess was undoubtedly the simplest and most beautiful method. There have been many brave girls in history. Unfortunately, dreams were always so weak when compared to reality. Without the guidance of a famous teacher, without the input of knowledge, without the relevant etiquette training, and without any help, none of the girls from the underground district passed the preliminaries. Finally, one appeared this year. However, she was not the most popular candidate. The three girls, Jiang Yuxia, Mo Zhong, and Hua Shi, were the most likely candidates to become the next female priest. Mo Zhong and Hua Shi both had extraordinary family backgrounds. The former was the daughter of an aristocratic family, and her family owned the largest resource transportation company on this planet. The latter was even more impressive. It was said that he was a distant relative of the Hua family of the main planet. Their lives were very similar to Jiang Yixia's. After they showed their outstanding talents and potential, they were trained by their families to become the new priestesses. Thousands of gazes were fixed on the long platform in the praying hall. Hundreds of thousands of eyes looked at the image in the night sky. Hundreds of millions of people were watching the screens at home or on the streets. The whole planet was paying close attention to the praying hall in the deep part of the prairie and the selection of the female priest. A worker was suspended from the alloy cliff wall between the 4-story platform and the 5-story platform below the Eastern Rift Valley. His right hand quickly tapped on the touchscreen, controlling more than 100 drones to repair the cliff. Dirty water leaked out from the cracks in the alloy plate not far below, dripping onto the remaining magma walls. It should not have fallen into the Chaoyang underground block, which was known for its harsh conditions, but the stench still spread. The worker was watching the light screen on his left wrist attentively, paying no attention to the stench. As Jiang Yuxia appeared, his heart shrank a bit. He thought that the black hair was right in front of him and that the beautiful girl was walking toward him. His right hand trembled reflexively. With a muffled bang, a drone crashed into the alloy structure, burst into countless sparks, and then rolled down on its own. The worker glanced at the drone helplessly, thinking that he would have to make another report. Then, he resumed watching the live broadcast on the light screen. There was a community on the 7th level below the Rift Valley in Shoer City. The New Era Institute was on the 7th level, and it was even lower on the cliff wall. To put it more precisely, it was on the 7.5 level. The students didn't leave the institute after school ended that day. They watched TV together in the canteen under the leadership of the fat president. The TV was showing the selection of the female priest. As the camera turned to Zhong Lizi and the main preacher announced that she was from the New Era Institute, cheers broke out in the canteen. When did student Zhong dye her hair? She's so beautiful. Isn't it a bit different? What do you people know? She went up from here, so she will be suppressed by the people up there. If she doesn't look special, how could she be seen by others? I think student Zhong's temperament has improved a lot after a few months at the University of Stargate. She has a very good temperament. Hearing the discussions of her classmates, Lu Shuiqian clenched her hands more tightly, thinking that they all said she was an emotionless iceberg when she praised her temperament. What were they thinking now? Her line of sight fell on the light screen. Seeing Zhong Lizi's red hair burning like a fire, she felt jealous and couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She couldn't even go to the surface of the earth, to say nothing of participating in the selection of the female priest. Why could that guy do it? 1,000 meters down from the cliff of the New Era Institute, they arrived at the Mingxia neighborhood at the lowest level. The conditions here were indeed much better than in the Chaoyang underground neighborhood. The raindrops formed by the dirty water were rarely seen here, and the wreckages of the drones falling down from the sky were rare. There was an inconspicuous house in the darkest part of the neighborhood. Its iron door was tightly shut, devoid of windows, and a light illuminated the messy objects on the platform. Mr. Dan, who had been a fakir for 40 years, pushed away the optical magnifier on his face. Hearing the faint noises outside the house, he furrowed his brows slightly, wondering what had happened. He pushed open the iron door and walked out. He came to the street that he hadn't seen for more than 10 days, and arrived at the night market by following the noises. The usually quiet night market was quite lively that day. It turned out that the owner of the barbecue stall had moved the TV screen in his house to this place. Mr. Dan curled his lips in disdain, thinking that these people were really a bunch of rats who had never seen the light of day. How could they get so excited just by watching TV? Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly saw a familiar face on the screen. He couldn't help but stop and wipe his glasses with his clothes. He took a few more careful looks and confirmed that it was indeed the little girl. What was going on? This student Zong often comes to my place to eat the barbecue and drink the wine. I could tell that this little girl was extraordinary at the time. You guys don't have the taste. The owner of the barbecue stall flipped the barbecue skewers and said excitedly with a cigarette in his mouth. The cigarette ash was blown off and fell on the skewers, wondering what kind of taste it would add. The people around the barbecue stall couldn't help but laugh when they heard the owner's words. They all said that he was a big talker. Everyone on the street knew that little girl. They all knew that she was poor and thrifty. Why would she come here to eat beef and drink wine? Seeing that they didn't believe him, the owner of the barbecue stall was very angry. He said with a red face, "You know nothing. She has even ordered eggplant before." The boss of the game hall was also smoking. His right foot was on the stool, watching the scene on the light screen with mixed feelings. I know this little girl. She is very obedient and very kind. Don't be fooled by her cold face. She is just pretending to be cool for those idiots. He suddenly came to his senses and slapped the guy across the face, cursing, "How dare you steal my money? Do you want to die?" The scoundrel fell to the ground after being slapped. "I won't dare do it again, boss," he cried while holding his head in his hands. The boss of the game hall threw the cigarette, but to the ground forcefully, and kicked him again, cursing, "How dare you steal from me? Do you think you are that devil?" Zong Lizi didn't have the intention to represent the tens of thousands of poor people in the Mingxia neighborhood or even the underground neighborhood. She didn't miss the days when she couldn't see the sunlight and the tasteless beef and eggplant. Yet, she was fully aware that she was the representative of those people in the eyes of the crowd that night. She had been under a great deal of pressure since she registered for the selection of female priest, and she had seen many peculiar gazes, all of which originated from her identity and background. She was, of course, very nervous at the moment. Even though she thought she had no chance of entering the final list of 3 candidates, she still wanted to perform better. She had participated in the preliminary selection of the University of Stargate, so she had some experience. She knew that the selection of the female priest consisted of 3 major items. Except for the last item, the contents of the first 2 items were the same. They were to test the candidate's memory and cultivation state in cultivation. Zong Lizi had some confidence in the former, but her cultivation state, she was at the 11th level of the fire-observing state. Though she was at the level of a teacher at the New Era Institute, she was merely an ordinary one among these talented girls. Mr. Xia began to read out the procedure. Zong Lizi grew more and more nervous. Looking at the green ceramic bowl on the table in front of her, she suddenly wished that the ceramic bowl would break into pieces so that she could delay the selection. Jiang Yuxia could sense her emotion. She reached out her hand and patted on the back of her hand gently. Zong Lizi let out a reluctant smile and took a deep breath. Then, she started breathing at a frequency that was most comfortable for her. She didn't even know that this frequency was the frequency at which Jing Jiu tapped the armrest on the chair on the deck, seemingly unconsciously. The current female priest had been selected more than 20 years ago. It had been many years since such an event had taken place on this planet. Those young female candidates felt as nervous as Zong Lizi but they concealed their nervousness very well, maintaining a calm countenance and a nonchalant demeanor. Only those who were truly confident wouldn't feel nervous at all, like Emo's Zone from the second special zone. She was the mistress of the Emo family in the Golden State and had gone through 3 rounds of gene modification. In order to become a female priest, she had trained for 12 years. She couldn't see any possibility that she wouldn't make it to the final list. Her line of sight fell on Zone Lizzie not far away. She was still calm, wearing an appropriate smile. Nobody could detect the disdain in her mind. Well, hearing the voice by her side, Emo Zong had the impulse to frown, but she was afraid of losing her composure. She suppressed her emotion forcefully, wondering what was wrong with this little girl of the Hua family. She was always so nervous, and her voice was so tender that it was disgusting. Huashi was by her right side. She had a round face, a picturesque eyebrows and eyes, and a hint of childishness still lingered on her face. She looked quite adorable. Pointing to the book on the table, the little girl said uncertainly, "Big Sister Emo, the test today is easier than the one we usually practice." Emo Zong couldn't believe her judgment. She looked at the other book on her table and ascertained that it was a book of divinity she had never read before. "It's not difficult to memorize it temporarily," she said, "but it's definitely not that easy. There are many ways to test one's memory. For instance, Jiang Yuxia participated in the preliminary selection of the 3rd level, which tested the student's ability to recognize the color and the ability to read water. In comparison, it was not a difficult task for these talented girls who had undergone gene modification and knowledge input to memorize a book they had never read before in a certain amount of time, unless they were given very little time, but that would be fair to all the candidates. However, the selection of female priests that night was truly interesting. It was because the rules announced next were as simple as that. All the girls had to memorize the book within 20 minutes. Those who couldn't do it would be eliminated. Hearing this rule, those girls who were not confident in themselves felt relieved. It was then that Jiang Yuxia suddenly said softly, "I've read this book before. Please choose another one." Chapter 800. Upon hearing this, both the young girls participating in the selection of the priests and the guests who came to watch the ceremony felt surprised. The books of theology placed in front of them by the praying hall weren't meant to be taught to outsiders. Even the Institute of Divinity didn't have them. Where had she seen them? The people suddenly remembered that she was a member of the priest clan, thinking that she had figured something out, thinking that her family was indeed rich in knowledge. Mr. Xia was fully aware that it wasn't the reason. He shot a glance at her imperceptibly and asked the preachers to fetch a new book of theology. Along with a bell, 99 young girls with black hair and 1 girl with red hair opened the book at the same time, creating a gust of wind. It was a beautiful scene. The young girls read the book in different ways. Jiang Yuxia's long and slender fingers turned the pages of the book gently, at a steady pace. Emo Zong was the most focused one, turning the pages of the book the fastest. It took her only a few minutes to finish reading the entire book. Then, she closed her eyes and started meditating. Huashi opened her eyes wide, as if she had found something interesting. She turned the pages curiously, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. It was unclear if she turned the pages according to her interest in the content of the book. No matter how they read the book, the young girls paid close attention to their postures, which were full of beauty. Who knew if the female priest behind the screen in the sky was watching them? Zhong Lizi was the only one who was different. She turned the pages of the book quickly, but she often returned to the previous pages and read them again. Her pretty face was full of worry. Many people wondered if she had forgotten about the previous pages after reading the latter pages. As time went by, Zhong Lizi grew more and more anxious. Her sitting posture had gradually changed, and her legs under the skirt had almost curled up habitually. Jiang Yuxia had already finished reading the entire book. She noticed Zhong Lizi's movement through the corner of her eye. She reached out her finger and knocked lightly on the green ceramic bowl. Reminded by Jiang Yuxia, Zhong Lizi sat back on her knees and resumed reading the book. There was a soft ding sound. 20 minutes passed in a flash. 100 preachers and female caretakers started checking the books at the same time in order to avoid the unfair treatment of those who were ranked later due to the time difference. Jiang Yuxia, Hua Shi, Mo Zong, and the other young girls answered the questions fluently. They could recite the pages accurately no matter which page the preachers and the female caretakers chose. Zhong Lizi had a hard time in the beginning due to her nervousness, but she had passed the test in the end. Since she had passed, most of the girls were naturally not stumped. Only 2 girls were eliminated because they were too nervous. It was a simple test. All the young girls, the guests in the praying hall, the people on the prairie participating in the water sacrifice, and the millions of viewers in front of the TV sets felt it odd. The selection of the female priest after more than 20 years was actually so casual. Then Mr. Xia announced the content of the second assessment. The girls would fight against a highly achieved swordsman from the military invited by the praying hall. The ones who could last longer would have a higher ranking. If he could defeat that military expert, he would naturally be the winner. Everyone thought that the expert from the military must be a high-ranking Star State warrior. But unexpectedly, the one who walked out from behind the curtain was also a young girl. The girl was wearing a military uniform, and both her appearance and temperament indicated that she was at most 20 years old. How strong could a girl in her 20s be? Was she qualified to be an examiner? Did she have the ability to defeat these 98 genius girls? A proud person like Mo Zong felt slightly angry, thinking that the praying hall looked down on them. He had made up his mind to defeat the other party. The governor suddenly stood up and said to the young female officer with an amiable expression, "Major Ran, why didn't you tell me that you had come to the Stargate?" Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Many guests stood up. Though they didn't know who this young female officer was, they could tell from the attitude of the governor that she was not an ordinary person. The identity of a young female officer had gradually spread among the guests as they discussed in low voices. They learned that she was an officer of the fleet of the 7th Army, whose name was Ran Handong. But why did the praying hall ask her to preside over the next test of martial arts? Why did the governor treat her so amiably? Sitting in the spot closest to the gray screen, Jing Jiao remained silent while looking at the young female officer below. He was surprised when he saw her behind the stone post earlier, because he didn't expect this rabbit to leave the fleet and come to the Stargate base. It seemed that she had something to do with that female priest. As for the second round of the martial arts test, he had no interest in it. As a matter of fact, the second round of the test went on smoothly and quickly. In the beginning, there were many gasping and surprised screams in the grand hall of the praying hall, but they had all disappeared soon after, leaving behind only the quietness and the sound of falling to the ground. None of those girls with black hair could withstand Ran Handong's attack for even a moment. They dropped to the ground one after another, looking quite pitiful. Mo Zong and Jiang Yuxiao were defeated by Ran Handong without any resistance. They were the most popular candidates for the selection of female priest, especially in the test of martial arts cultivation. Everybody knew that they had already entered the Golden State, but they were defeated so easily. As such, the cultivation state of this young female officer was unimaginably high. Zhong Lizi didn't create a miracle either. She was knocked 100 feet away by a simple swing of Ran Handong's fist. She was in so much pain that she couldn't even speak. If Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi hadn't helped her up, she wouldn't have been able to stand up for a long time. Ran Handong glanced at Zhong Lizi with a baffled expression. It seemed that she felt a bit surprised, but she retreated to the back of the gray screen without saying a word. It was different from the prairie occupied by hundreds of thousands of populace and the grand hall occupied by thousands of guests. It was quiet behind the gray screen. The lights of the battleship and the starlight shone down from the skylight, illuminating the water in the bowl and the flower petals on the surface of the water and the deck behind it. Sitting in front of the green ceramic bowl, the female priest looked at the flower petals on the surface of the water, swaying with the wind in silence. It seemed that she didn't care about the selection taking place at the moment. And is the Stargate base so short of talented people? Except for that little girl named Jiang Yuxia. None of them are good at fighting. Ran Handong came to the side of the female priest and sat on her knees on the ground. The red-haired girl you thought highly of is even worse. She hasn't even passed the golden state, she said in a baffled tone. The female priest lifted her head and looked at the grand hall outside the gray screen, a surprised expression in her eyes. The scene on the gray screen changed again, changing from the previous matches in the martial arts test to a single word. The word was very big, and the strokes were clear, giving off a comfortable feeling. It could be seen from anywhere in the praying hall. It was the word quietness. A main preacher walked out and read the decree of the female priest in a low voice, which was the content of the third test. It was quiet in the praying hall. Everybody was listening to the main preacher attentively, in case they missed something. Even the populace in the Federation of the Milky Way who didn't believe in God had some understanding of the inheritance of the female priest and knew that the word quietness was the key word for this planet. The final test of the first two selections of the female priest was also about this word, but the methods were different. One of them was to observe the first petal of the cloud flower at night. The other time was to wait for the spring silkworm to spit out the first thread. What was the topic of the test that day? The stroke of the word quietness on the gray screen disassembled and changed its shape, forming a new word. It was liquor. The scene was displayed clearly in front of everybody, including those in the praying hall, those on the prairie, and those in front of the TV sets on the whole planet. Nobody was stupid enough to think that the praying hall would choose the female priest based on the drinking capacity. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. As such, they waited quietly. The main preacher didn't give any explanation or introduction of the rules. All he did was invite the girls to drink as much as they liked, along with the faint footsteps and the occasional clanking of the utensils. Countless bottles of liquor were placed on the tables in front of these girls. There were strong liquors made from grains, wheat wine, grape wine, rice wine, etc., all in great quantities. It was believed that these girls couldn't drink all of them, even if they had a high cultivation base. Each bottle of liquor was labeled with the type of liquor, the place of origin, and the standard alcohol content, but there was no brand or label. The girls didn't know what to do, wondering what it meant. The guests watching the test couldn't help but discuss it in a low voice. They had several conjectures. Some of them said that it depended on the girls' manners and self-control after drinking the liquor. But the main preacher didn't specify how much they had to drink. Someone retorted, "Wouldn't it be safe to drink only a little bit?" Some of them thought that the praying hall wanted the girls to judge the age and brand of the liquor to show their profound knowledge, but they were opposed by many people. It was the selection of the female priest, not the wine taster. Some of them thought that the test of the praying hall didn't have a fixed rule. It was a comprehensive evaluation of all aspects. As for how to get the highest score, they would find out later. The CEO of the Twirling Rain Company sat in the second row. He had remained calm from beginning to end, not revealing any unusual expression. All he did was pay attention to Zone Lizzie in silence. He didn't expect Zone Lizzie to come to the third stage, and the test of quietness that day was so strange. If she performed better, she might have a chance to be one of the last three candidates. All he knew was that the girl with red hair had a secret connection with his father-in-law, but he didn't know what kind of person she was to have such an expectation. Those who knew Zone Lizzie well wouldn't think so, like Jingjio. All he hoped for was that the girl would calm down and not drink the liquor if she couldn't. Another example was the owner of the barbecue stall in the underground neighborhood of Mingshan. He had seen Zone Lizzie get drunk twice with his own eyes. Watching the scene on the TV, his expression grew terrible. He didn't even notice that the eggplant on the barbecue rack was on the verge of burning. What's wrong? Mr. Dan didn't quite understand his anger, thinking that the more chaotic the test on the ground was, the more advantageous it would be for the girl. The owner of the barbecue stall put the half-burned eggplant on Mr. Dan's plate and said angrily, "You people know nothing. This girl can only drink one bottle of ale." Hearing this, the residents on the street who were watching the TV with interest couldn't help but exchanged glances, thinking that they were doomed. Only those who couldn't get drunk didn't know how much they could drink. Zhong was not such a person. She was fully aware that she was a drunkard. Looking at the small hill of beer bottles on the table in front of her, her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. She lifted her head reflexively to look in the direction of the guests of the University of Stargate, but she didn't see that figure. She couldn't care less about her manners. She looked left and right, but she couldn't find him. In the end, she had no choice but to give up, feeling a bit frustrated. What kind of test was it? Even if it wasn't a test of her drinking capacity, she would still have to drink a little. Should she just lick it secretly? No, it would be too dishonest. Even if it were the ale, she would still be drunk after drinking 1.5 bottles. Since she would get drunk no matter how much she drank, she might as well drink as much as she could before she passed out. Zhong suddenly thought of this idea. She picked up the bottle of strong grain wine with the highest alcohol content and poured it into the large cup. The large cup was about 0.5 kilogram. She closed her eyes, not daring to look at it. She brought the cup to her mouth and then started drinking. A barrage of surprise screams broke out in the crowd of guests. It was because the way she drank the wine was truly unrestrained. Mo Zhong swirled the red wine in her cup slowly. She shot a mocking glance at Zhong, thinking that these children in the lower class were really rude to drink the strong grain wine in a wine cup. If Zhong were sang TSK, these people would be scared to death. Chapter 801. Zhong had almost choked after pouring the strong grain liquor into her stomach. She coughed twice, her face red. Jiang Yuxia picked up a handkerchief from the table, intending to wipe off the wine stain on the corners of her mouth. The crowd of guests screamed again, and the applause broke out in a corner. It was evident that they were all shocked by the drinking capacity of this girl with red hair. Zhong flashed a sweet smile at Jiang Yuxia, and then her body leaned forward. Her head bumped heavily on the table with a thud. Nothing unexpected or miraculous had happened. As Jingjiu had thought, the cultivation methods in this universe couldn't prevent people from getting drunk, at least in the fire-observing state and the golden state. In this aspect, it was indeed useless. Jiang Yuxia was startled and rushed to check on her. A female caretaker came over and checked on Zhong. After making sure she was fine, she signaled for Jiang Yuxia to ignore her and continue with the test. The moment Zhong was drunk, countless screams rang out in the praying hall, followed by countless whispers, and some uncontrollable laughter could be heard. Different people had different opinions on the same matter. Mr. Xia stood there expressionlessly after receiving the gesture from the female caretaker to confirm that she was fine. Looking at the girl who was drunk, the CEO of the Twirling Rain Company thought of more things. His father-in-law had a poor drinking capacity, and so did his wife. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to coax them into getting a marriage certificate. Was this the so-called heredity? The screams in front of the TV sets had different emotions. Most of them were surprised and sympathetic, and the screams in the barbecue stalls in the underground neighborhood were full of shock and worry. I told you so. The owner of the barbecue stall took off his hat angrily and threw it on the ground. He exclaimed while pointing at the TV set, "Even the angle of her falling, the force and the sound are the same. She obviously can't drink alcohol, but she took the test this time. Is it because the higher-ups are targeting us on purpose? She is not only rude, but also has no self-awareness. I didn't expect that she would be eliminated." Mo Zhong curled up the corners of her mouth, a cold smile appearing occasionally. She picked up the red wine cup in her hand and sipped it slowly. After making sure that Zhong was fine, Jiang Yuxia returned to her table and picked up a ceramic cup to taste a kind of rice wine. While she opened her eyes wide and looked curiously at those wine bottles. She poured some of each into the glass, and no one knew what kind of wine she was trying to make. The chaos caused by Zhong drunkenness had soon subsided. The gazes fell on the three girls with black hair again, feeling amazed, thinking that they were indeed the daughters of the aristocratic clans and the most popular candidates in this election. Each of them had their own beauty, even though it was a simple thing like drinking wine. It didn't take long before Mo Zong changed 3 cups and drank the wine at the bottom of the 3 cups. She was the first to stop and smiled confidently. She felt that the test this time was to observe the candidates' self-control. More girls put down their wine glasses one after another, indicating that they should stop here. Jiang Yuxiao was still drinking. The speed at which she raised the cup was neither too fast nor too slow. It was rather steady, exuding a natural sense of beauty that was pleasing to the eyes. Huaxi's childish face had turned red. A few different kinds of wine mixed together didn't taste bad, but made the drinkers more intoxicated. She suddenly raised her sleeve to cover her small face and belched. Then, she looked at the crowd embarrassedly, her small face growing redder. A burst of friendly laughter broke out in the crowd of guests. About half an hour later, the last test of the day was over as a girl from the military base in the 3rd Rift Valley who had the best tolerance for alcohol put down her wine glass. What made Mo Zong and some other girls unhappy was that the praying hall hadn't announced that Zhong Lizi and the other 2 girls had been eliminated until the end. They were all so drunk, but why hadn't they been disqualified? Mr. Xiao walked to the center of the grand hall after exchanging a few words with the main preacher in a low voice. The discussions in the praying hall had died down. Everybody was waiting for him to announce the final result, or at least the result of this round of the test. Unexpectedly, Mr. Xia didn't do so. He announced that the test had officially begun. Along with this announcement, the preachers and female caretakers swarmed out from behind the stone pillars on both sides of the grand hall like the tide. They took away the wine bottles and wine glasses as quickly as possible, and they brought back the books of theology and put them on the tables. The books of theology on each table had been read by the girls before, so they were all in order. It was evident that the praying hall had been prepared for this moment a long time ago. Seeing this, the crowd screamed again in surprise. Some of the people in the back couldn't help but stand up. During the first test of memory, both the people in the praying hall and the viewers in front of the TV sets thought it was too simple and meaningless. It turned out that they were waiting here. More than an hour had passed, and Ran Handong presided over the test of martial arts in the middle of the test, and the girls had drunk so much wine. Could they still remember the contents of the books? After hearing what Mr. Xia said, the girls were shocked mentally. Many of them couldn't keep their composure anymore, showing a nervous expression on their faces due to the influence of alcohol. Some of the girls couldn't help but look at the spectator stands, hoping to find their family members or schools to get some information from them. Looking at the chaotic scene around her, Mo Zong curled up the corners of her mouth, letting out a confident smile, thinking that she had an excellent memory and that she hadn't drunk any wine earlier. As she was thinking of all this, the preacher standing in front of her asked expressionlessly, "What are the 3 definitions of God as explained by the preacher of Dongshan in the 2nd line of the 4th article of the Simple Theory?" The other girls were also being asked the same question. During the first test, they had just finished reading the book of theology given to them, so they could answer the questions without any hesitation because they had a deep memory of it. However, they were all stumped at the moment. The pressure from Ran Handong and the alcohol had a great impact on their ability to recall their memories. It didn't take long before a few girls were eliminated because they had answered the questions wrong 3 times in a row. In the next moment, more and more girls left their seats, and some cries could be vaguely heard on the other side of the path. Jiang Yuxia lowered her head, her expression calm and her eyelashes unblinking. It was unclear what she was thinking about. Some of them thought that she had forgotten the contents of the book like the other candidates. They couldn't help but feel regretful. She lifted her head and looked at Zhong Lizi, who was still drunk on the table. She sighed inwardly and started answering the questions of the preacher in front of her in a low voice. It seemed that Zhong Lizi couldn't answer the questions, so she decided to do it herself. She had been educated since her childhood, and her only dream was to become a female priest. Though she had drifted away from this dream due to her rebellious mentality as she grew older, she still regarded it as an untouchable pearl. Though she didn't want to be a female priest, she was even more unwilling to let this holy and solemn position fall into the hands of those people, like Mo Zone. Jiang Yuxia's answers were accurate, without a single word wrong. The answers flowed out from her lips like the spring water and reached everyone's ears. The preacher examining her revealed an admiring expression in his eyes. Huashi answered the questions smoothly. Though she spoke a bit slower and her voice sounded a bit childish because she had drunk the wine, no one could find any mistake in her answers. The female caretaker who was responsible for examining her had an increasingly tender expression in her eyes. Unexpectedly, Mo Zong, who was the most confident among them, made a mistake in the beginning. The three definitions of God written by the preacher on the Eastern Mountain in the Simple Theory chapter was rather unorthodox. She hadn't read them during her preparation, and she was too relaxed at the moment. As such, she recited the first half of the sentence, God is not the source of all things, but the focus of all things the moment she opened her mouth. Fortunately, she would be eliminated after making 3 mistakes. She pulled herself together and recalled the content she had memorized earlier. As a result, she didn't make any more mistakes. As time went by, only a dozen or so girls with black hair had passed the test and remained in the field. In addition to them, the girl with red hair was the only one who was still drunk. The main preacher of city walked over and asked expressionlessly, while looking at the preacher standing in front of the table of the girl with red hair, "Why haven't you started?" The preacher said helplessly, "She's not even awake. How can we continue the test?" The main preacher came before Zhong Lizi and put his finger in front of her nose. Seeing this, the crowd felt speechless, wondering if the preacher was afraid that she would pass out because she was drunk. It was then that Zhong Lizi woke up slowly. She smelled of alcohol, her face bewildered. She had no idea what had just happened. The main preacher told her the content of the last test. He turned around and walked away, wiping off the secret plaster on his right hand noiselessly. Zhong Lizi's drunkenness had lessened a bit, but her headache was still there. She was bewildered for a while before she recalled what the main preacher had told her. She couldn't help but scream in surprise. The preacher didn't want to waste any more time, so he started questioning her. Zhong Lizi had no time to pay attention to the manners reminded by Jiang Yuxia. She sat down cross-legged and raised her right hand high while covering her forehead with her left hand, yelling, "Wait a moment! Wait a moment!" All the gazes were fixed on her. The people of the whole planet were looking at her. The CEO of the Twirling Rain Company couldn't sit still anymore. His body leaned forward slightly, a nervous expression showing on his face. A great many people were cheering for her in front of the television sets. The barbecue stalls of the night market in the underground neighborhood were crowded with people. The people clenched their fists nervously and yelled, "Wake up!" Zhong Lizi suddenly took a deep breath and brought back her hands. She took the hair tie from her wrists and tied up her red hair. Then, she poured a handful of water from the green ceramic bowl on her face and rubbed her face forcefully. The water drops slid down her youthful face, as if she had just braved a rainstorm. A flower petal was left on her face, looking quite beautiful. She looked at the preacher as if she were looking at her own life. "Come on," she yelled. Seeing this, Jingjiu stopped watching. He got up and walked toward the other side of the gray screen. He knew how the story would develop. It had nothing to do with the fact that he had written a novel of 2 million words. It was simply because the story was related to him. He had stayed here for a long time because he was worried that Zhong Lizi would vomit when she was too drunk. It would be difficult to deal with the situation when she went back to the hotel at night. The guests in the praying hall, the candidates, and the viewers in front of the television sets had no idea how the story would develop. Countless people looked at the red-haired girl with various emotions. Zhong Lizi's voice was a bit hoarse. It was obvious that she was under the influence of alcohol. In the beginning, she couldn't speak very well, and she would often choke after saying a few words. However, as time went by, she answered more quickly and more fluently. It was unclear if it was because the effect of the alcohol had worn off or for some other reason. Jiang Yuxia looked at her from the side, her eyes beaming, full of surprise and pride. Mo Zong's face grew more and more unsightly. Huaxi's big eyes were full of admiration. In her eyes, it was not a big deal that this red-haired girl could recite these difficult sentences, but she thought of using the flower petal water in the green ceramic bowl to wash her face. She was so handsome. As the question and answer session went on, the surprise screams in the praying hall grew louder. The guests didn't expect that this girl from the underground neighborhood had actually achieved it. The CEO of the Twirling Rain Company nodded slightly, feeling pleased, thinking that she was indeed the child favored by the chairman. The cheers could be heard on the prairie outside the praying hall. Those who chose to support Zhong Lizi for various reasons waved their fists excitedly in front of the television sets in countless households, and the children ran around incessantly. The canteen of the New Era Institute was in a mess. Those former classmates of Zhong Lizi slapped the tables incessantly, yelling indecipherable words. The owner of the gaming parlor in the underground neighborhood suddenly kicked the thief to the ground while staring at the light screen on the television. "Get the hell out of here," he yelled. The barbecue stalls in the night market were filled with bottles of wheat wine. The owner of the barbecue stall clinked the bottles with the customers. Even Mr. Dan, who didn't drink much, held a small bottle of distilled liquor and sipped it slowly. He had been squatting in the operating room all year round, so his body was not in good shape. He felt a bit dizzy after drinking a few mouthfuls of the liquor. "She's really outstanding. She's indeed the daughter of the professor. But that professor is too stupid," he murmured, after making sure that she had answered all the questions correctly without a single mistake. Zhong Lizi felt a bit relieved. The drunkenness she had suppressed earlier came back up again, and her cheeks, which had been cooled by the water, grew warm again. The examination seemed to be over. The female caretakers and the preachers of the priest clans came to ask the last questions, and it seemed that they were going to do some registration. The voices of the female caretakers and the preachers were very gentle, but they seemed to have a magic power that could make the listeners feel close to them, making them wish they could tell them everything. There were a dozen girls left in the hall, most of whom were still drunk. Guided by these voices, they started answering the questions of the other party. Mo Zong was fully aware that this was the final examination. No matter what the female caretaker asked her, she merely smiled, saying nothing. Jiang Yuxia was smiling as well, but she didn't give any useful information. The female caretaker didn't get the answer she wanted. Zhong Lizi felt the effects of the drunkenness again. She pinched her thighs incessantly to stay sober, thinking that she couldn't afford to fail at the last step. It was a preacher who questioned her. "You don't have to answer my questions, but I suggest you answer them," he said mildly while looking at her. Zhong Lizi uttered him vaguely. The preacher asked softly, "What does your best friend do?" Zhong Lizi thought that since Jing Jiao had so many secrets, he might have a blood feud with him. It was impossible for her to tell him. She shook her head resolutely. The preacher asked, "What kind of boy do you like?" Zhong Lizi thought that since Jing Jiao had so many secrets, he might have a blood feud with him. It was impossible for her to tell him. She shook her head resolutely. The preacher asked again, "What is your biggest secret?" Zhong Lizi thought that Jing Jiao had. Well, why did it seem that she had thought of this a moment ago? The effect of the medicine given to her by the main preacher of Shore City had worn off. Zhong Lizi shook her head while feeling tipsy and confused. The girl named Hua, she was also drunk, smiling foolishly at the female caretaker in front of her. Seeing the two girls smiling foolishly, the guests couldn't help but laugh out loud, thinking it was quite amusing. For a moment, the empty and solemn praying hall was filled with a joyful atmosphere. Chapter 802. It was then that the selection of the new female priest was officially over. Mr. Xia stood in the middle of the grand hall again. He asked the guests and the people on the planet to wait for a while, and he would announce the final list of the 3 candidates soon. Zhong Lizi was not nervous anymore. She was still feeling tipsy, and what came next was, wow, seeing the red-haired girl vomiting into the green ceramic bowl. The people in the praying hall burst into an uproar. The TV station changed the scene immediately to ensure that the audience in front of the TV sets didn't see the scene. Otherwise, the food sales on the whole planet would be affected, and the owner of the barbecue stall in the night market in the underground neighborhood would curse again. Jiang Yusha came over to take care of her hastily. She wiped her face and stroked her back to soothe her breathing. While she had a worried expression on her small face. She intended to help her, but she was feeling tipsy and couldn't sit still. She fell to the ground and fell asleep. Mo Zong didn't move. Seeing the scene, the corners of her mouth curled up again, revealing a pleased smile. She had been feeling uneasy. Among a dozen girls in the hall, she, Jiang Yuxia, Hua Shi, Zhong Lizi, and Zhong Lizi should have the best overall results. Her earlier performance was much better than Zhong Lizi's. The problem was that she had answered the 3 definitions of God incorrectly in the last test. What if the praying hall? Now that Zhong Lizi had embarrassed herself in public, it was impossible for the praying hall to put her on the final list of the 3 candidates. The female caretakers of the priest clan came over in a hurry and cleaned up the mess as quickly as possible. Fortunately, Zhong Lizi had a high fortune, so she vomited all the water in the green ceramic bowl. She had used a great deal of the water in the green ceramic bowl when she washed her face, so it was easy to clean up the mess. As for the unpleasant odor, it had vanished without a trace thanks to the advanced ventilation system in the praying hall. Zhong Lizi felt much better after vomiting, and she felt much more awake. She leaned against Jiang Yuxia's chest with her eyes closed, as if she had fallen asleep. Hearing her breathing, Jiang Yuxia knew that she pretended to be asleep because she felt embarrassed. Jiang Yuxia let out a soft smile, but didn't expose her. All she did was pat her gently. It didn't take long before Mr. Xia and a dozen main preachers walked out from behind the pillars. They made the official announcement to the guests and the populace of the planet on the other side of the camera. According to the results of today's selection test, the praying hall has decided that the last 3 candidates are Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi. Hearing the name announced, Jiang Yuxia helped Zhong Lizi sit up and stood up slowly. Hua Shi was gently awakened by a female officer using a secret medicine. She stood up in confusion, and her body was still a little askew. Mo Zong straightened her back and lifted her buttocks slightly off the seat cushion. She was ready to stand up in the most proper manner when she heard her name. When she heard the 3rd name, the smile on her face froze. And Zhong Lizi, the loudest cheers of the night, broke out on the prairie outside the praying hall. Countless children in front of the TV ran even faster. The host and hostess drank ale and clinked glasses with each other, laughing and celebrating the birth of the planet's new history. Some of the tables and chairs in the canteen of the New Era Institute were damaged. The fat president wiped the sweat off his face excitedly and fearfully, yelling at the director of the General Affairs Office to bring out the best food ingredients in the canteen warehouse. The owner of the arcade stared at the TV screen and puffed on his cigarette. He couldn't speak a single word. The owner of the barbecue stall was carried on the shoulders of the customers and paraded on the narrow sidewalk. Mr. Dan drank up the distilled liquor in one gulp, revealing an irrepressible delight on his pale face. Then he fell asleep with his head propped on the table, completely unaffected by the commotion around him. This was not the first time a girl in the underground neighborhood had participated in the selection of female priest, but it was the first time she had entered the official test, the 3rd stage of the test, and the final 3 candidates in the list. This was the first time something like this had happened in a great many years. The people in the underground neighborhood were celebrating. Even those who had never left the apartment buildings came out to the streets and joined the celebratory crowd. From the Mingsheng community to the Chaoyang community to the Paradise community, and even the people on the upper levels of the neighborhood and on the surface of the earth expressed their enthusiasm and congratulations. As for whether Zhong Lizi could become the new female priest, it was entirely up to the female priest's choice or the will of the god. Nobody in Zhong Lizi could do anything about it, but they wouldn't feel disappointed by the result. It was a miracle, or even a miracle, that she could make it this far. The female caretaker didn't leave after waking Hua Shi up. Hearing Zhong Lizi's name, she came before Zhong Lizi and brought the secret medicine to her nose. Zhong Lizi couldn't pretend to be asleep any longer. She had no choice but to wake up slowly. She couldn't help but sneeze when she felt a burning sensation in her nasal cavity. All the people on the planet were watching her at the moment, so the TV station couldn't shift the camera away from her. As such, the scene was witnessed by everybody. It was believed that it would remain in people's memories and history for a long time. It wasn't until then that she came back to her senses. Was it me? She asked incredulously, ignoring her embarrassment. It was you. Jiang Yuxia was even happier than her. A panicked and angry voice suddenly burst out in the praying hall. It's not fair. Mo Zong stood up and looked at Mr. Xia and a dozen main preachers, asking with a pale face, why is she in the final list? Mr. Xia said expressionlessly, it's the praying hall that decides the results of the test. Nobody is allowed to question or interfere with the decision. Mo Zong was nevertheless a young girl. She was on the verge of breaking down, so she couldn't care less about the consequences. I performed better than her in the first round, and my cultivation state in the second round is much higher than hers, even though she is a bit stronger than me in the third round. Why did you choose her? Is it because she is from the underground neighborhood, and you have to take care of the people there? Do you have to sacrifice me for this? Strangely enough, the TV station didn't do any emergency response at this time. Instead, her words were broadcasted to all the TV screens. The people in the praying hall and the viewers in front of the TV sets had gradually calmed down. They found that there was something wrong, at least in terms of fairness. If one didn't consider Zhong Lizi's identity in the underground neighborhood, her performance was indeed not as good as Mo Zong's. And the final identity registration. I know what the test is, but I didn't say anything, Mo Zong said in a trembling voice. Mo Zong said with a trembling voice. Tears kept flowing down her face, making her look extremely pitiful. Mr. Xia was still expressionless. He looked at her in silence. Everybody wanted to know what answer he would give on behalf of the praying hall and the priest clan. Zhong Lizi felt a bit nervous. Jiang Yuxia grabbed her hand and squeezed it a bit, indicating that she didn't need to worry. The reason is simple. Mr. Xia continued calmly, while looking at Mo Zong. She drank more alcohol than you in the final test. Upon hearing this answer, the praying hall fell silent, and then an uproar broke out. They didn't expect it to be such an absurd reason. Was it true that the selection of a female priest had to be won by drinking more alcohol? In the next moment, they found that the answer given by Mr. Xia was correct. The praying hall didn't tell them what the test was when they brought the alcohol. It could be one's temperament, self-control, manners, or the deep ceiling of one's consciousness after getting drunk. Why couldn't it be one's alcohol tolerance? To be safe, Mo Zong chose the most conservative method. She was the first one to put down the wine cup. It was evident that Zhong Lizi couldn't drink alcohol, and she didn't know the method of the test. As a result, she chose the most aggressive and risky method. Wasn't it an outstanding trait? As the people were trying to find an excuse for Zhong Lizi in the praying hall, Zhong Lizi was bewildered, wondering how it worked. She had never thought that she would win against someone because of her alcohol tolerance. Even so, it's still unfair. It's because this young girl was drunk at the time, and she recited the scripts much later than the others. A chubby middle-aged man stood up slowly, his face devoid of any expression, his eyes deep in the eye sockets showing a hint of cruelty. Many people knew that he was Mo Zong's father, the head of the Mo clan of this generation, and the owner of the largest interplanetary transportation company on this planet. The head of the Mo clan said to Mr. Xia icily, since she was drunk at the time and couldn't wake up to take part in the test, you people should disqualify her. It's a matter of procedure of the praying hall. It has nothing to do with Miss Zhong Lizi. It was then that another voice burst out. The people looked in the direction of the voice and found it was the general manager of the Twirling Rain Company, feeling startled. Why did the general manager of the Twirling Rain Company speak for this young girl from the underground neighborhood? Why did he oppose the Mo clan? It was well known that the Twirling Rain Company was the largest gaming company on this planet, and its influence was similar to that of the Mo clan. As the chairman of the Twirling Rain Company rose in the political circle of the main planet over the years, the influence of the Twirling Rain Company was vaguely superior to that of the Mo clan. Yet, the opponent was the Mo clan nonetheless. The head of the Mo clan felt surprised as well. He turned around and stared at the general manager of the Twirling Rain Company, as if he wanted to figure out what was on his mind. The governor and the director of the base, sitting in the first row, eyed each other. The rest of the high-level officials and the heads of various clans shook their heads imperceptibly. It was not until now that they realized that the Mo clan was not well prepared. They didn't even know the relationship between the Twirling Rain Company and a young girl named Zone Lizi. As such, the Mo clan would be defeated for sure. The development of the event was as those important figures had predicted. Mr. Xia continued after the general manager of the Twirling Rain Company. That's right. It's a matter of procedure. The head of the Mo clan spun around abruptly and said sharply, "No matter what the problem is, someone has to give us an explanation." The main preacher of Shou City asked calmly, "Who was responsible for assessing Miss Zone Lizi's final recitation?" A preacher walked out with a grave expression on his face, saying, "This subordinate mishandled the situation. Please punish me, Master Main Preacher. Since you have a good attitude, you can go to the College of Divinity to reflect on your mistakes for 2 years," said the main preacher. The College of Divinity was Jiang Yuxia's alma mater. It was located on the 3rd floor of the basement, but the environment there was excellent, and the preachers taught there and earned their rewards very quickly. As such, it was not a place for her to reflect on her mistakes. Upon hearing this, everyone knew the attitude of the praying hall. It was evident that the praying hall intended to protect Zone Lizi. No matter how outstanding the Mo clan was, what could they do? For some reason, Mr. Xia was not in a good mood that night. He didn't even take a look at his niece, Jiang Yuxia. He said to the head of the Mo clan expressionlessly, "You can either sit down or leave." The head of the Mo clan couldn't sit still at the moment. He grabbed his daughter's hand and headed toward the outside of the praying hall. The minor disturbance had come to an end. Jiang Yuxia, Hua Shi, and Zone Lizi, the 3 girls on the final list, were led into the inner hall by the female caretaker. They were ready to take a bath and change clothes, greet the female priest, and wait for the final decision. The enthusiastic applause had finally broken out in the praying hall. The teachers and students of the University of Stargate were especially excited. It was a glorious moment that 2 of the 3 girls on the final list were students of the University of Stargate. Of course, they didn't think that Jiang Yuxia and Zone Lizi were exchange students from other universities at the moment. As they were leaving, Zone Lizi looked at the crowd again in an attempt to see that familiar figure, but she was disappointed again. The guests who came to watch the ceremony bowed toward the sky-like gray screen and left the praying hall like the receding tide. Next would be the decision of the female priest, which was the manifestation of the will of God. The mortals were not allowed to watch the ceremony, so they had to leave the praying hall and wait for the decision. After taking a bath, Zone Lizi, Jiang Yuxia, and Hua, she walked to the back of the gray screen in the new white ceremonial robes. Thinking that they were about to see the female priest, the 3 girls couldn't help but feel nervous. Zone Lizi and Hua, she had lost their tipsiness a long time ago. The female caretaker who led them stopped at the entrance of the hall. Their footsteps could only be heard in the quiet hall. The battleships in the sky had already left. The starlight grew brighter, shrouding the green, stone-paved floor like the water. Seeing the woman sitting on the futon, they guessed her identity. As they were about to kneel down and bow to her, they suddenly found another person standing on the deck not far away. That person wore a blue tracksuit, glittering under the starlight. Hua Shi didn't know who that person was, uttering a faint cry reflexively. An incredulous expression showed in Jiang Yuxia's eyes. Zone Lizi was startled as well. She didn't expect Jing Jiu to show up here, but in the next moment, her astonishment turned into warmth and gratitude. She finally understood why she was selected as a candidate for the position of female priest. But who on earth was he? I wish the little girl Haitang a happy birthday one day in advance. May she be very popular. Chapter 803. Jingjiu turned around and walked back to the praying hall, sitting down by the female priest. The starlight seemed to have followed him to the praying hall, making it a bit brighter. The water in the green ceramic bowl in front of the female priest exuded a faint glow, looking like the solidified glass. A few flower petals were drifting in the air irregularly. The three girls suppressed their shocked and uneasy emotions and knelt down before the female priest according to her instruction. The line of sight of the female priest moved slowly over their bodies. Her deep and intelligent eyes seemed to be able to see through everything about them. The three girls were fully aware that the successor of the female priest would be chosen in the next moment. They were all nervous with different emotions. To their surprise, the female priest didn't announce the successor right away, but looked at Jingjiu instead. Jingjiu asked Zhong Lizi, "Are you sure you want to be the female priest?" Zhong Lizi understood what he meant by this. She couldn't help but lift her head and stare into his eyes blankly, remaining silent for a long time. Jiang Yuxia and Hua, she also realized that the female priest had to listen to the will of this youth in blue clothing when choosing the successor. They lifted their heads in surprise. After a long while, Zhong Lizi took a deep breath, as if answering the question, and asked while staring at Jingjiu, "Are you sure you want to have a child?" Jingjiu didn't think too much about the meaning of this question and replied casually, "No." Zhong Lizi felt relieved, her expression as if the ice had melted in the spring and the first flowers had bloomed. "I'll do it then," she said. "No matter who you are, you must be the most outstanding figure in this patch of starry sky. If I want to follow you, I'll have to become the female priest to be qualified." The female priest said with a faint smile, "Let's do it then." In fact, the successor of the female priest had been decided a long time ago. It had been decided the moment Zhong Lizi decided to participate in the selection. Jingjiu merely wanted to make the final confirmation, in case she regretted it in the future. Though Zhong Lizi was mentally prepared, she was still bewildered when she heard what the female priest said. She didn't respond for a while. Hua, she was a smart girl, so she understood what the female priest meant. But she was also bewildered, wondering if it was that simple. "Big sister is really awesome," she said to Zhong Lizi enviously. On the contrary, Jiang Yuxiao was the calmest and the happiest. "Congratulations," she said to Zhong Lizi with a faint smile. It was silent inside the praying hall, and so was it outside the praying hall. Even the tens of thousands of people who had been celebrating on the prairie the whole day remained silent. They looked at the magnificent building not far away in silence, waiting for the final result. A main preacher walked out from the praying hall, holding a scroll with a crystal on the shaft and a golden cloth in his hands, unrolling it slowly. Seeing this scene, the crowd gradually became restless, but soon calmed down again. The important figures, led by the governor and the director of the base, stood in the square outside the praying hall, listening to the order of the female priest in silence with the ocean of people behind them. When people heard the name that was no longer unfamiliar to them, they could not help but feel shocked. Was it really her? A priestess had finally appeared in the underground district. After a moment of shock, the crowd burst into cheers. The chief executive and the other big shots applauded. Mr. Xia, who was standing in the corner, was still expressionless, but his clapping movements were obviously a little stiff. The head of the Mo clan stood further away, holding his crying daughter in his bosom, his countenance gloomy, but a hint of hesitation could be seen in the deep end of his eyes. A few battleships that had left the surface of the earth and arrived at the edge of the atmosphere shot out the light beams at the same time, and then they flickered incessantly to celebrate according to the etiquette of the ancient battleground. In the next moment, countless fireworks shot out from various places on the surface of the earth, illuminating both the night and the day. The people started celebrating again. Except for the buildings on the surface of the earth, the fireworks were strictly forbidden in the living quarters of the underground. Yet, the fireworks couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the populace that day. Even though the police department had tightened up the management, the fireworks still came out from the steel cliffs once in a while. Most of the streets in Show City were exposed to the sky, so they didn't mind the fireworks. The fireworks could be seen everywhere, reaching the height of the mountain range on the Earth's crust at the highest point. The canteen of the New Era Institute was in a mess. All the tables and chairs had fallen to the ground. Many male students called their classmates to go to the life department to buy some drinks. The director of the student affairs office, who was in charge of discipline, was furious and went to the principal to make a decision. The fat principal kept wiping the sweat off his face with a handkerchief. He waved his hand impatiently and rebuked. "Why do you have to be so strict when you're having a good time? What do you mean?" It was unclear when the girl named Lu Shuiqian had left the campus. She walked along the path on the lawn toward the forest. Her back looked rather lonely and desolate. Judging from the direction she was heading in, it seemed that she was also a child living in the underground neighborhood. The underground neighborhood, called Mingsheng, had turned into a jubilant ocean. The owner of the gaming parlor announced that the internet was free of charge that day. The owner of the barbecue stall was carried by the crowd to another neighborhood. The food left on the stall became the delicacies shared by everybody. A few middle-aged men who seldom left the apartment building stood by the ovens and greeted their neighbors. Mr. Dan was asleep on the table with a large bottle of strong grain liquor in his arms. His face was full of wrinkles and a smile under the glasses that were pushed to one side. The deck behind the praying hall was the only place on the entire planet that was quiet at the moment. Standing by the railing of the deck, Jingjiu looked at the fireworks shooting up into the sky from time to time, his face devoid of any emotion under the illumination of the fireworks. Jingjiu wasn't surprised by the result. It was the main preacher of Show City who guided Zhong Lizi to participate in the selection of the female priest. The main preacher did so because Zhong Lizi was someone close to him, so the female priest would naturally choose her as the successor. The fireworks on the prairie suddenly became denser, and the light beams from the battleships flickered more violently. The cheers at the front gate of the praying hall rose to the sky. It seemed that Zhong Lizi was receiving the greetings of those important figures and the populace on the high stone steps of the moment. The female priest walked to the deck. She didn't dare walk shoulder to shoulder with Jingjiu, so she stayed half a step behind him. "I chose her because she is the closest to you," she said softly. "I think she is different. Do you have a different opinion now?" asked Jingjiu. "That child's talent is too ordinary. Even though she has made rapid progress in her cultivation and studies, she is not outstanding, at least not as good as that child Jiang Yuxia." The female priest continued in a more humble voice, "I don't dare doubt your judgment, but she is indeed ordinary." Looking at the fireworks in the night sky, Jingjiu thought that no matter which fireworks were brighter and more beautiful, they were merely fireworks. There was no need to pay attention to them. The female priest continued, "The praying hall has investigated her carefully a few days ago and found that she has no blood relationship with the chairman of the Twirling Rain Company." "Yes," confirmed Jingjiu. "She's my successor now. It doesn't matter even if she is exposed, but I still can't get rid of my doubts." The female priest went on, "She is very ordinary in terms of appearance, temperament, and talent. And her birth parents don't have any special stories. But you're willing to perform a miracle on her and cure her illness. Why?" Jingjiu turned around and said to her, "She is indeed ordinary, but it doesn't matter." The female priest thought she understood what he meant, saying sentimentally, "Yeah, if she were a true genius, she wouldn't need the guidance of God." "No," said Jingjiu. "I just happened to meet her in this world. I don't care whether she is a genius or an ordinary person." The female priest thought she understood what he meant. She retreated with a faint smile. It was true that God didn't need to care about these things. The fireworks were too dazzling. After the lights shot by the battleships passed through the atmosphere, they mingled with the foul smoke of the carnival on the prairie. making the atmosphere even murkier. Jingjio didn't like those battleships, nor did he like the feeling. He turned around and left the deck. The two girls, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi, had been sitting on their knees in the back hall. Though they didn't become the successor of the female priest, they would have the corresponding positions on the final list. The whole praying hall was busy at the moment, so nobody had time to pay attention to them. All they could do was stare blankly at the water and flower petals in the green ceramic bowl. Seeing Jingjio come back, they couldn't help but feel nervous. A youth who could decide the successor of the female priest was not an ordinary person. He was even more powerful than all the important figures on this planet. Who was he then? Huashi didn't dare ask. Jiang Yuxia had finally let go of the responsibility of being the female priest that she had shouldered for more than 10 years. Hello. She greeted Jingjio earnestly, feeling relaxed. Jingjio didn't pay any attention to her. Jiang Yuxia had experienced this before, so she didn't feel frustrated. We've met a few times at the University of Stargate, she continued. Jingjio, of course, remembered who she was. However, he had made up his mind the day they met on the lawn based on his experience as by Zao, that he wouldn't speak to this girl with black hair no matter what. It was quiet in the room. The sounds of the fireworks could be heard from the deck. Huashi glanced at Jiang Yuxia sympathetically. She stepped forward and held her hand, squeezing it to comfort her. The sounds of the fireworks on the prairie grew sparse and eventually disappeared, as if the excitement had left the human world. The battleship had returned to the space. The important figures who came to participate in the celebration returned to their respective manors and residences in the flying devices. The revelers had gradually dispersed. The whole world had finally quieted down. The female priest led Zhong Lizi back to the back hall. There was no trace of excitement on Zhong Lizi's face, save for tiredness and bewilderment. She had suddenly turned from a poor girl in the underground neighborhood to the most respected figure on this planet. Anyone would need some time to digest the shock. Seeing Jingjio, her eyes grew brighter. As she was about to say something to him, hurried footsteps could be heard outside the gray screen. A figure appeared on the gray screen, and a voice rang out. Something is wrong outside the praying hall. The newcomer was the main preacher of show or city, the most trusted subordinate of the female priest. The night wind blew over from the deck, bringing a hint of coldness. It was exceedingly quiet in the grand hall. Everybody understood what he meant by this. The new female priest had just been elected. Did someone intend to create trouble? Who on this planet dared disrespect the female priest? A fearful expression showed in Huashi's eyes. Jiang Yuxia held her in her bosom and patted her back. Zhong Lizi looked at Jingjio, hesitating to say something. At this moment, they saw a scene that they could never have imagined. The female priest bowed to Jingjio earnestly and said in the most humble manner, "The mortals are fools. Please have pity on them." "I'll kill a few of them," said Jingjio. The conversation between the female priest and Jingjio was to answer some readers' questions. In addition, I wish my mother in heaven a good night. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.